Chapter 250. The Jianghu had been eventful since ancient times. For hundreds of years, dynasties had come and gone, and the position of the country had changed. The Jianghu was also filled with endless disputes. A few days ago, Senior Han and Steward Zhao had stirred up a major event not long after it had ended. In less than 10 days, a new storm had arisen. The Han family, the 72 styles of Wuxia swordplay, the 4 C's escort agency. These words appeared frequently in the Jianghu recently and could be heard everywhere. It was impossible to find out who had started this rumor. In just a few days, everyone in Qing and Prefecture and the neighboring provinces knew about it. Among this, countless storytellers in the brothels played a major role. The Han family's 72 styles of Wuxia swordplay were constantly exaggerated. At first, it was only spread as an anecdote of the Jianghu. After discovering to their surprise that these things were very popular among the people of the Jianghu, countless storytellers seized the business opportunity. Overnight, many storytellers were born. For example, the Wuxia swordplay was the most profound and mysterious martial arts in the Jianghu. The current head of the Han family had only understood a small part of it, but his martial arts were enough to dominate the Jianghu. If he could understand half of it, he could become a great grandmaster and laugh at the world. When he swung his sword, no one dared to disobey him. Someone patted his chest and guaranteed that he had seen Senior Han attack and instantly cut down a dozen people with his sword. But he couldn't even see how Senior Han had attacked. There were also people who focused on the 8 trigrams. In thousands of words, they analyzed why Senior Han had married 5 wives and concubines and still had no children. They proved that the saying, "If you want to practice this martial art, you must first castrate yourself." From a professional point of view, they analyzed how many levels of swordplay Senior Han had understood. In a short period of time, even many things about Senior Han when he was young were dug up, including his martial arts, enemies, friends, and achievements in his life. If there was a storyteller in Qing and Prefecture who could not tell the story of great hero Han's life in detail, they would be laughed at by all of their peers. The difficulty of making a living would instantly increase to hell mode. In short, the 4 C's escort agency became popular, and so did Han Dazhong. His fame in the Jianghu reached the pinnacle of his life. Not only the martial artists of the Jianghu, but even the common people also learned about the power of the Han clan's Wuxia swordplay from the storytellers. They began to admire the peerless swordsman who could move unhindered in the Jianghu with just a single sword. However, as the leader of the Han family, he could not feel happy at all. Pa! The cups splashed on the ground. He didn't know how many teacups he had broken in the past few days. Just a moment ago, another disciple came to report that a shipment of goods had been stolen last night, and the Han clan had lost several hundred taels of silver. Moreover, from morning until now, the escort agency had not received a single shipment. Have you found out who did this? The muscles on Han Dazhong's face twitched, and his words seemed to be squeezed out from between his teeth. I've already sent someone to investigate, but there's still no news. The young man standing in the hall picked up the broken pieces of the teacup and shook his head. Everyone in the Jianghu knew about this matter, so it was impossible to find out who was the one who first said it. The most important thing to do now was to think of a way to stop the losses and restore the reputation of the escort agency. Useless, all of you are useless. Han Dazhong flew into a rage. He wanted nothing more than to find the despicable person hiding behind the scenes and tear him into pieces. Only then would his hatred be appeased. This rumor had directly put the Han clan and the 4 C's escort agency on the line. The goods they were escorting were stolen, and even the disciples who were escorting the goods outside were captured and interrogated about the Wuxia swordplay. Not only did the disciples not know, but even Han Dazhong himself did not know what the Wuxia swordplay was. It was the best swordplay in the world, and anyone who mastered it would be able to dominate the Jianghu. If the ancestral swift wind swordplay of the Han clan was that powerful, he, Han Dazhong, would have become a grandmaster long ago and ruled the Jianghu. Why would he wait until now? The most despicable thing was that those people thought that he had castrated himself to become a eunuch, and married so many wives and concubines just to cover up his disguise. This made Han Dazhong so angry that he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. The person who spread the rumor was extremely vicious. They must have planned this beforehand and investigated him thoroughly. Otherwise, there would not have been a rumor of him castrating himself. In his early years he was accidentally injured in a fight. Although other aspects of his body were not affected, he lost the ability to carry on the family line. Thus, he regarded his son, who was born before that, as the only descendant of the Han family. Perhaps it was because of Su Zheng's excessive love and indulgence that caused his son to be involved in a murder case and be targeted by the authorities. He had wanted to use his influence to allow his son to hide outside for a few years and return after the rumors died down. He did not expect that before he could escape from Qing Prefecture, he would fall into the hands of that woman. The only heir of the Han clan had been severed. He hated that woman to the core, which was why he had been so anxious to have someone from the Lulan kill her a few days ago. At this moment, the young man in the hall raised his head. A trace of doubt appeared on his face as he asked, "Master, is the Wuxia swordplay real?" "Get out." It was one thing to be humiliated by others, but he did not expect that this good-for-nothing disciple would also stab him in the heart and doubt the authenticity of the matter. Wasn't it the same as suspecting that he, Han Dazhong, was a eunuch? Han Dazhong finally could not take it anymore. He pointed at him and scolded angrily, "Get out of here." This disciple takes his leave. The young man knew that he had asked something he should not have and immediately retreated. After walking out of the door and passing through a few long corridors, the panic on his face disappeared and was replaced by a gloomy expression. He cursed in his heart, "Old bastard, I've never seen him mention such a powerful martial art. My fellow brothers have never heard of it either. It seems like he has never treated these disciples as one of his own." He scoffed at the idea that if one wanted to practice the Wuxia swordplay, they had to castrate themselves. As his disciple, he had served him for many years and naturally knew some of his secrets. Castration was fake, but there was no smoke without fire. The matter of the Wuxia swordplay made him suspicious. He had long felt that his master had been holding back from them and had never intended to pass on the most powerful martial art to them. Did he want to take it with him to his grave? As he was thinking this, a servant came over and whispered, "Young Master Zheng, the fifth madam wants to discuss something with you." "Understood. You may leave," the young man said in a low voice. After looking around, he turned around and walked in a certain direction. At the same time in the hall, Han Dazhong cupped his hands to an old man sitting across from him and said, "Brother Wang, long time no see. May I know why you have come to visit today?" The old man smiled and said, "I heard that the escort agency has encountered some difficulties recently, so I specially came to take a look." Brother Wang is very considerate. Han Dazhong smiled and felt touched. Many friends had come to visit the Han family these past few days, but they all asked him about the Wuxia swordplay. There were very few who truly cared about the safety of the Han family. The two exchanged greetings for a while before the old man stood up and said, "If you have any difficulties, don't hesitate to ask. My Wang family may not be as wealthy as your Han family, but we still have some assets. I believe we can help a little." "Thank you, Brother Wang." Han Dazhong cupped his hands again. With this thought alone, he would definitely go to the Wang family to express his gratitude after this matter was over. "You're welcome." The old man smiled and waved his hand. When he reached the door, he turned back and pretended to casually ask, "I heard that the Han family's Wuxia swordplay is the best in the world. I hope to have a chance to experience it." The smile on Han Dazhong's face froze and the veins on his forehead began to bulge. An old servant ran in from outside and said in a panic, "Master, it's not good. 2 more shipments have been stolen." Han Dazhong's face turned pale and he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. Chapter 251. The master of the Han family unfortunately fell ill. The Four Seas escort agency was temporarily closed and no longer accepted any escort missions. This was clearly an unnecessary move. After this incident, the business of the Four Seas escort agency plummeted. 5 out of 10 escorts were robbed. Who would trust them with their goods? After a few days of fermenting, the rumor had begun to develop in the direction of a myth. The Han family had a peerless sword manual. If one learned half of it, one could become a top-notch master and become famous in the martial arts world. If one learned 20%, one could become a grandmaster. If one learned 50%, one could sweep through the martial arts world, be invincible, and beat grandmasters. Almost everyone in the martial arts world knew of this rumor. The Han family sent many people to stop these rumors, but they could only use force to deter the storytellers in the brothel. After they left, what needed to be said would still be said. This was their livelihood. How could they not take advantage of this to earn more money? Although the status of the performers was low, the court had never convicted them based on their words, let alone the Han family. At first it was just a thin layer of ripples. However, when this layer of ripples spread out in all directions with Qing Prefecture as the center, countless unseen undercurrents began to surge in every corner of the martial world. The business of the Four Seas escort agency has stopped. More than half of the escorts left the Han family to make a living on their own. I heard that when Han Dazhong learned of this, he vomited 3 liters of blood on the spot. Now he has been bedridden for a few days. When Wu Er spoke of this, his face turned red and his saliva flew everywhere. He gulped down a mouthful of tea and said excitedly, "I've long disliked that Han guy. So what if he's good at martial arts? He can bully people just because he's good at martial arts. Now he's getting his just desserts." Although Wu Er did not know Han Dazhong, his elder brother was also in the business of escorting goods. The Four Seas escort agency relied on their numbers and power. These small escort agencies were often bullied by them. Not only were their businesses robbed, even the people were beaten black and blue. This was only one of the reasons. Han Dazhong was quite famous in the Wulin world, but he had nothing to do with the word chivalrous. What he did was to steal chickens and dogs, deceive the world to gain fame. In short, Wu Er had not liked him for a long time. This time, there was no doubt that the Four Seas escort agency had suffered a great blow. It was certain that they would suffer a great blow, and it was hard to say whether they could recover. In particular, when he heard that the man with the surname Han was bedridden due to anger, he felt very comfortable all over. Li Yi pushed the plate of broad beans in front of him, indicating for him to continue. Wu Er did not stand on ceremony. He pinched a few beans and threw them into his mouth, making a crunching sound. He said, "Nowadays there are many people in the Jianghu who are plotting for the Han family's Wuxia sword manual. Up until today, there are at least 3 forces that have started to move against the Han family." After drinking a cup of water to moisten his throat, he looked at Li Yi with some doubt and asked, "Sir, do you think Han Dazhong is a eunuch? Is it true that the Wuxia swordsmanship can only be practiced by castrating oneself?" Seeing Wu Er's doubtful expression, Li Yi knew that he had achieved the effect he wanted. Even Wu Er, who had personally spread the rumor, had doubts about whether Han Dazhong had a penis, let alone others. In fact, before this he was not completely sure whether this method would work or not. After all, the Wuxia swordsmanship was only a martial arts technique fabricated by Old Master Jin. The disaster of the Lin family only existed in the novel, The Smiling, Proud Wanderer. What if the martial arts masters in this world did not fall for it? But at that time he had not thought of a good method, so he might as well give it a try. The Lin family started off as an escort agency, and so did the Han family. The Wuxia swordsmanship was said to be extremely fast. With a sword in hand, the world was mine. Han Dazhong's nickname was Fast Sword. It was said that those who were not good at martial arts could not see his sword clearly. To practice the Wuxia swordsmanship, one needed to castrate oneself. Han Dazhong married 5 wives and concubines, but for 20 years he did not have half a son. This senior Han was born to be a scapegoat. Art came from life, but it was higher than life. Old Master Jin's understanding of human nature was quite accurate. Li Yi thought that those people would not be interested in a martial arts that required one to castrate oneself. At least, they would not have such a strong interest. However, it turned out that for those who were obsessed with martial arts, becoming the world's #1 martial arts master was far more interesting than being a real man. The Han family was definitely finished. Ever since that senior Han gathered those Greenwood bandits and came to Willow Leaf Village to make trouble, their ending was doomed today. The temptation of the Wuxia swordsmanship was too great. Those people would definitely try to get it. Of course, Senior Han was a hero with a strong temperament. No matter what torture those people used on him, he would not say anything. Even if he was beaten to death, he would not say anything. Even if he was violated by those people and lost his chastity, he would not reveal any secrets about the Wuxia swordsmanship. No matter how they asked, Senior Han looked like he did not know anything. Those people would definitely be very disappointed. In order to get the secrets of the swordsmanship, they would probably use some other means. As for what the means were, it was not something that Li Yi needed to worry about. He pinched a broad bean and put it into his mouth. He did not know who made the spiced broad beans today. The taste was a little bad. However, he could not rule out the fact that his taste was a little picky. After all, Wu Er was eating it with relish. With a pot of tea he could make a movie-watching set meal. The price was 5 copper coins for a small one and 10 copper coins for a large one. The price was fair and fair. As for the taste, he also prepared a few more kinds. The original 5 spices, the soy sauce, and the spicy ones were more troublesome. He did not know if the spicy ones existed in this world. Although he wanted to eat it, he did not need to look for it all over the world just to make a spiced broad bean. Cornell was a little spicy. Although it was not authentic, it was barely acceptable. How is it? Is it delicious? The girl named Xiao Zhu ran over from the side and looked at Li Yi expectantly. Li Yi shook his head. The girl's mouth immediately became flat. The taste is not bad. The girl's disappointed expression immediately disappeared. she asked happily. Then how much do you think it should be sold for? Li Yi pointed at the plate in front of him and said, if the plate is a little smaller, it should not be a problem to sell it for 5 copper coins. The girl blushed and left happily. Her vanity was greatly satisfied that the broad beans she made could be recognized by Li Yi. Such a small plate could be sold for 5 copper coins. The brothel was going to open tomorrow. In the future he could also make money. In the Han family, the famous senior Han in the martial arts world, the controller of the Four Seas escort agency, the head of the Han family, Han Dazhong, was lying on the bed with an ashen face. In less than 10 days, the once prosperous Han family had become a mess. All the escorts had run away. The Four Seas escort agency only existed in name. Only a few disciples remained. The Han family was finished. The escort agency was gone. Until now, he still did not know who was the one hiding behind the scenes to destroy the Han family. The threat from the martial arts world was still there. A sword manual that could dominate the martial arts world was enough to turn countless righteous sects that claimed to be chivalrous into bandits. There were many people who would take advantage of the chaos to attack the Han family. If it were not for the fact that he still had some prestige in the martial arts world these years, someone would have already come to fight. The door was pushed open and a young woman walked in from outside. Seeing the pretty woman, a trace of softness appeared on Han Dazhong's face. This was the 5th madam whom he had just welcomed into the family not long ago. These days, all his wives and concubines had run away and only the 5th madam was left. It often reminded him of his wife who had died young. Apart from lamenting, he was very relieved that the 5th madam had never left him. The 5th madam put a tray on the bedside cabinet and said while sitting in front of the bed, "Master, don't worry. Everything will be over. Xiaorou, don't worry. I will definitely make the Han family rise again." Han Dazhong supported his body and sat up. He looked at the woman and said affectionately, "Yes, I believe in you, master." The woman called Xiaorou nodded and brought a bowl of black medicine from the tray over. She looked at him with the same affectionate eyes and said slowly, "Master, your health is more important. Master, your health is more important. You should drink the medicine first." Chapter 252. He took the porcelain bowl from the 5th madam's hand and drank it up. The medicine was very bitter, but Han Dazhong's heart was sweet. Only in adversity could one see one's true feelings. Of his wives and concubines, only the 5th madam was left. Although the servants in the mansion did not run away these days, their faces were full of worry. If it weren't for the fact that they would be killed as escaped slaves if they ran away, the huge Han's mansion would have been empty long ago. In the past, if he stamped his feet, he could at least stir up a storm in Jianghu in the territory of Qingyan Prefecture. However, when the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. When the wall is down, everyone pushes it. The small forces that used to be attached to the Han's family had drawn a clear line with them to avoid being affected. As for his good friends, after symbolically visiting the Han's mansion, they would vaguely mention the Wuxia sword book. Han Dazhong had long given up the hope of asking them for help. Perhaps they had played a part in the Han family's current state. Fortunately, there were still people who were loyal to him. He glanced at the beautiful 5th madam and lay down on the bed. He had been in the martial arts world for decades, but he was so angry that he had to lie in bed one day. He had never been so weak in his life. Today he didn't know why. He just got up for a while but he felt sleepy again. His eyelids became heavier and his vision gradually blurred. The 5th madam smiled at him on the bed. Her smile was very beautiful. This was probably the last image left in the mind of the ambitious and ruthless senior Han. Today the brothel was very lively. The customers whispered to each other and it was noisy. The only waiter who delivered tea was running so much that his legs were about to break. The broad beans made by Xiao Zhu had been sold out. It was a small plate of 5 copper coins. Often customers thought it was not enough, and they would give him 10 copper coins and ask him to get a bigger one. The originally open stage was hung with a curtain, which tightly covered the stage. The customers' eyes glanced over there from time to time. What was the painted skin stage? It caught their curiosity. Lin de Bao was the only waiter here. At the moment he was a little nervous. His palms were sweating as he held the teapot. He had to be nervous. Grandpa Sun and the others had been busy for so many days waiting for this day. This was related to what kind of life they would have in the future. If they failed today, they would all have to leave tomorrow with their burdens on their backs. No, I can't think about it anymore. There are still a few pots of tea left. I can't let the guests wait anxiously. Wiping the sweat from my palms, I picked up the teapot and jogged over. As early as a few days ago, a large notice was pasted outside the main gate of the house. Whether it was passers-by or guests, everyone could see it. The content of the notice was very simple. On the first day of the 12th lunar month, there would be a performance of painted skin in the brothel. The location of the brothel was marked on a small map below, and everyone was welcome to come and watch. No one knew what a stage play was. However, they were no strangers to the painted skin. It was the most popular story in the brothel a few days ago. The content of the story was very exciting. It was said that it could stop children from crying. Even the most courageous man would shiver after hearing it. Even the security at night in Qing and Prefecture was a lot better. After hearing the story, there were fewer people walking at night. Although they didn't know what a stage play was, they were sure that it wasn't a dry story told by the old man. With the reputation of the painted skin, the first performance was almost full after the advertisement was put out. Li Yi sat in a remote corner and Fang sat next to him. He was a little listless and didn't even have the mood to watch the play. Thinking that he had quarreled with his wife again, Li Yi didn't care too much. Suddenly, someone squeezed into the empty seat next to him. Wu Er came over and said in a low voice, "Han Dazhong is dead." These days Wu Er was very concerned about the matter of Senior Han. He knew that the county magistrate was more concerned about it than he was. Once there was any news, he would immediately come to report. When the government received the report from the Han family's servants, Han Dazhong was already dead in bed. It was said that he was poisoned to death. The entire Han family was turned upside down, and all the gold and silver were gone. The government found some clues on the same day. It was said that the person who did it was the fifth madam that he married not long ago. That woman had an affair with one of Han Dazhong's disciples and added arsenic to his medicine. The two of them took the Han family's belongings and fled. They are now wanted. Ware said in detail. In fact, these days the Han family had been in the eye of the storm. No matter what happened, it would quickly spread out. He already has half a foot in the coffin, yet he still wants to marry a concubine. This is great. He didn't die in the hands of others, but in the hands of his own people. Regarding this matter, Wu Er was actually very surprised. According to the news he heard in the Jianghu, there were already many forces that were ready to make a move. Their target was the Wuxia swordplay of the Han family. In the end, before they could do anything, Han Dazhong died. This time it was estimated that many people would be disappointed. According to the previous speculation in the entire Han family, only Han Dazhong knew the swordplay of the Wuxia swordplay, and he didn't pass it on to any of his disciples. After Han Dazhong died, the Wuxia swordplay was naturally lost. After hearing this news, many people would beat their chests and stamp their feet, regretting that they didn't act earlier. In the following period of time, it was estimated that the Han family would be very lively. Han Dazhong didn't have any children, but he had a lot of disciples. Except for the one who ran away with the fifth madam, the rest of his disciples and wives would probably think of ways to divide the whole Han family. Of course, there would always be people in the Jianghu who didn't give up. That swordplay was miraculous. Wu Er was sure that if they could become the number one in the world, many of them would cut off that thing without hesitation. It was not enough for the Han family to be turned upside down. If they didn't dig 3 feet into the ground to find that thing, they wouldn't give up. Even Wu Er had once wondered in his heart whether that thing was more important or being the number one in the world. After struggling for a whole day, when he told his elder brother about his doubts, he was almost beaten to death by him. Since then, he had never thought about being the number one in the world. Li Yi had almost completely integrated into this world. The weak were prey to the strong, and only the fittest survived. Some people did things unscrupulously, and when they did something wrong, no one would punish them. This was wrong. From the beginning to the end, he had never thought about letting go of the surname Han. Since no one would punish him, he would do it himself. Yesterday, he fiercely slapped himself a few times to erase the thought of being the number one in the world from his mind. After sobering up, Wu Er finally realized that the evil swordplay, the number one in the world, was just a casual story told by the county magistrate. This story was spread out from his mouth. The Han family, which was a giant in his eyes, was destroyed and fell apart because of this story. Thinking about it, the origin of this matter was nothing more than the story that the county magistrate spent 15 minutes to let him remember in the room that day. Wu Er didn't sympathize with the Han family at all. On the surface they were a senior in the martial arts world, but in fact they did some petty things. The things that Han Dazhong had done were enough for him to die more than 10 times. Wu Er was a little excited to be able to personally eliminate this evil for the martial arts world. Suddenly he thought of something and turned to look at Li Yi. He asked in a low voice, "Sir, Han Dazhong is dead. What about Squire Zhao?" Chapter 253. Fang looked at the man called Wu Er and the son-in-law talking in a low voice and felt very uncomfortable. Senior Han, the escort agency, the Wuxia Swordbook, the conversation between the two could not escape his ears, but he did not understand what they were talking about. He knew that the son-in-law was doing something very important these days, but he did not know the specifics. In the past, the son-in-law would not hide anything from him, but this time he did not have any intention of telling him. He looked like a man with thick nerves, but in fact he had a meticulous side. The son-in-law did not need him to do things anymore. This fact made Fang feel very hurt, but he could not say it out loud. The programs in the brothel were not interesting. The curtain in front of the stage had been pulled back, and the audience could see the situation on the stage. A young man wearing a green robe appeared on the stage. As soon as he started, he bowed to the audience and said, "I am Wang Sheng from Qingyan Prefecture. Everyone greetings." Most of the people present had actually heard the story of the original painted skin. After Wang Sheng came out of the story, they couldn't help but look forward to it. This stage play was really interesting. It was much better than just listening to the story. At this time the sound of footsteps came from the side. Wang Sheng turned his head to look and said to himself, "Whose family is this Xiaonyang's son? Why is he in such a hurry before the sun is up? Let me go up and ask." Li Yi watched from the corner. Everyone had a look of interest on their faces. It was clearly the first time they had seen this kind of performance. Without a microphone and sound system, it was destined that the brothel could not be very big. Moreover, the venue needed to be quiet enough so that the people in the far corners could clearly hear what was being said on the stage. Fortunately, the audience's professionalism was high enough. Perhaps because they had seen too many performances, they would not make a sound when they were not supposed to. Occasionally they would disturb others and immediately become the focus of the people around them. After a few times, it was very likely that they would be thrown out. In terms of the effect of the performance, of course, it could not be compared to the performance of the future, but from the perspective of the present, it was already very good. Their preparation time was not short, and the props were very complete. There was even a background board at the back. A few large wooden boards were put together, and the wooden boards were pasted with paper. The paper was a three-dimensional painting. Sitting below the stage, it really looked like a real scene, and the impact was not small. Putting everything else aside, just this alone was enough to stun many people. There were already people below the stage gasping in surprise. Was the sky and sun at the back painted on? This painting is really similar. Yeah, the paintings are so realistic. This stage play is so much more interesting than those storytellers and singers. The three-dimensional painting was not drawn by Li Yi. There were only two people in the world who knew how to draw three-dimensional paintings. One was him, and the other was Lady Zue Mo, whom he had met a few times. It seemed that Ruoqing had a good relationship with her, and these things must have been drawn by her. The creativity was not bad. Even Li Yi did not think of it at the beginning. To be able to make such a change showed that their thinking was not too rigid, and they knew how to make some changes. Painted skin was very popular in ancient times, and the erotic elements in it were a big selling point. Things like female ghosts and seductresses could attract these people the most. Wang Sheng and that beautiful woman could do it every night, and it could satisfy the fantasies in their hearts. Of course, the scene of rolling in the sheets could not be acted out. Otherwise, the government would come to arrest them, and the lightest punishment would be a crime of indecency. When Wang Sheng and the woman fell on the bed, the curtain was drawn at the right time, causing a sigh of dissatisfaction from the audience. The curtain was quickly drawn again, and this time it was a new scene. The wooden board behind was also changed to the scene of the market. Wang Sheng met the Taoist priest, and the conversation between the two made Wang Sheng suspicious. The scene changed again, and Wang Sheng returned home to see the female ghost drawing skin on the bed. The makeup skills of the ancient people should not be underestimated. At least when he saw the female ghost dressed up by a performer on the stage, even Li Yi could not help but shiver. In order to set off the terrifying atmosphere, there was naturally background music at this time. It was the kind of music that gave people goosebumps. The person playing the music hid behind the scenes, and there were also some creepy strange sounds mixed in. Needless to say, in the entire brothel, there was no one else but Old Sun who could have such vocal skills. The door and windows had long been sealed, and the inside of the brothel was pitch black. In order to let them see clearly, candles were used on the stage. As the flames swayed, the horrifying face of the female ghost could be vaguely seen. There was a huge difference between hearing and sight. The feeling of listening to a ghost story and watching a horror movie was on a completely different level. Some people below the stage had already covered their eyes, not daring to watch. A burly man in front of Li Yi had his head almost stuffed into his pants. He could even hear the crying of a child not far away. Coincidentally, at this moment the female ghost raised her head and looked down, and the audience instantly exploded. The curtain was drawn again and there was a lot of noise. Old Sun and the others stood on the stage, their hearts extremely perturbed. That was the end of the show for the day. Whether the audience liked it or not, they really had no idea. The perturbed soon disappeared. After a short uproar, copper coins were thrown up like rain by the people without a care for their lives. Old Sun was hit on the forehead by a piece of silver, but he was not angry. He quickly picked it up and put it in his pocket. I'm rich, I'm going to be rich. Old Sun was not the only one who was excited. Wang Xing was desperately putting money into a jar, and a piece of silver fell off the stage. The female ghost jumped off the stage to pick it up. The makeup on her face had not been removed yet, and her green skin looked particularly creepy. Fake fangs made of bamboo stuck out of her mouth. The man closest to her let out a strange cry and fell straight down. The people around him immediately hid 2 feet away. The female ghost picked up the silver and looked at them with a blank expression. Sister Ruoqing, so much money? The girl named Xiao Zhu stood on the side of the stage holding Ruoqing's arm and shaking it non-stop. Her big bright eyes were shining. She had never seen such a generous customer. She even saw some people throw their jade pendants on the stage, which meant that their hard work these days did not go to waste. These people all liked the performance just now. Wan Ruoqing's face also showed a relaxed expression. Although she did not go on stage, she was in charge of all the rehearsals these days. At this moment she finally saw the results. Li Yi did not go over to share the joy with them. The situation here was within his expectations. While Old Sun was busy picking up the money, he walked out of the brothel with Fang. On the way home, he passed by Her Royal Highness's mansion and was stopped by her. Although she lived next door, Li Yi did not see her at all these days. He did not need to think to know what she was busy with. He was really worried that if she accidentally blew up her precious body, would the emperor come after him? I'm leaving, Emingzu said directly. Where are you going? Li Yi asked subconsciously, but he was a little puzzled. Her Royal Highness could go wherever she wanted. Did she need to report to him? Back to the capital. Hearing Mingzhu's answer, Li Yi was stunned for a moment, and then a surprised expression appeared on his face. He could not wait to confirm, really? We are friends. Even if I'm really leaving, you don't have to be so happy, right? Emingzu looked at him with her arms crossed and frowned. Chapter 254. Of course he was happy. How could he not be happy? Her Royal Highness was leaving. What reason did Li Yi have to be unhappy? There wouldn't be anyone staring at him every day trying to squeeze out his remaining value. Whatever he made, she wouldn't be the first to snatch it away, not even giving him a little reward for his hard work. Days without Her Royal Highness, he was like a bird that had escaped from its cage, a wild horse that had broken free from its reins. In short, his days were as comfortable as they could be. Who would want to live a life of being stared at every day? Li Yi looked at her expectantly and said, I'm a stranger in a foreign land. Every festive season I miss my family more. Seeing that the new year is coming, I should go back and have a look. Oh yes, will you come back after you leave this time? Emingzu silently recited the 2 lines of the poem he had just said and said, if there are no accidents, I will come back after the new year. Come back. Li Yi's expression was hard to conceal the disappointment on his face. Emingzu looked up at him, do you hope that I will never come back? Li Yi quickly shook his head, no. There's still a month before the new year. There's no rush to go back. It's not too late to stay for a few more days. Then stay for a few more days. Emingzu nodded and said, Shun Liang made some changes to the formula of heaven's punishment. He's going out of the city to test it in the afternoon. You should come along. Emingzu turned and left after she finished speaking. Li Yi really wanted to slap his own mouth. Why did he have to say one more sentence when everything was fine? Emingzu was going to leave after all. As a princess, she couldn't be wandering outside during the new year. Whether she would come back or not, at least Li Yi would be able to relax for a while. Luck Square, Li Yi personally cooked a total of 8 dishes and a soup. Before the last dish was even served, Li Xian was already sitting there wolfing down the food. He didn't have the slightest demeanor that a member of the royal family should have. Emingzu Li did not move her chopsticks but continued to drink the wine cup by cup. In the past, he would hold the jar of wine in one hand and drink from it. Perhaps he wanted to leave a good impression before he left, but his actions today were much more elegant. Li Yi was a little gloomy. She was about to leave. Why didn't she set up a banquet to entertain her old friend at a high-class place like the Jade Courtyard of Drunken Fragrance Building? Why did she ask him to cook at Rui Workshop? However, seeing that he wouldn't be able to see her soon, he didn't want to bicker with her. For the sake of a better life in the future, what harm was there in working hard? Before the last plate of sweet and sour pork could be placed on the table, Li Xian's chopsticks reached over. When there were no outsiders around, this guy didn't seem to have received any royal etiquette. He was a guest at someone else's house. If an ordinary kid dared to do anything, he would have been beaten to death by his parents. At least he had a little conscience. He knew to leave some food on the table for him. He picked up a piece of pork tenderloin that had just come out of the pot and chewed it slowly. He couldn't help but sigh. His cooking skills were really getting better and better. Li Xian raised the wine in his cup and said, "Emingzili will be leaving tomorrow. This cup of wine is to send you off." After saying that, he drank the wine in one gulp. His posture was very heroic, giving off the feeling of a hero in wine. Those who didn't know would think that his alcohol tolerance was very high. In fact, the alcohol in the cup did not exceed 10 degrees. Giving Li Xian a look of disdain, he picked up his cup and took a sip of the sweet grape wine. He buried his head and continued to eat. Emingzili was the real hero in wine. The wine jar beside her was the strongest alcohol produced by Rui Workshop. She didn't even blush after drinking a few cups. "Li Yi, what do you want to do in the future?" Emingzili seemed to have drunk enough. She put down the wine cup, looked at him and suddenly asked. Li Yi was fighting with Li Xian for the last piece of sweet and sour pork tenderloin. After having true qi, his movements and reactions were much faster. Li Xian was no match for him at all and easily defeated him. Putting the pork tenderloin in the bowl, he said without raising his head, "I never thought about it. It's good like this now. When I have nothing to do, I lie in the yard and bask in the sun, go to the brothel and listen to the opera. In the future, maybe it will still be like this." They were having a good meal, but they had to talk about their dreams. On this point, Li Yi had nothing to talk about with her. Their identities were worlds apart. Her Royal Highness liked to get rid of the tyrants and bring peace to the people. Li Yi didn't have such a big ambition. He was happy to have a yard with Rui to bask in the sun. Although he was not ambitious, he was happy to live in peace. He failed to snatch the last piece of sweet and sour pork tenderloin from Li Yi. Li Xian was a little disappointed, but after listening to him he was a little envious. He didn't envy that he could bask in the sun in the yard, nor did he envy that he could go to the brothel and listen to the opera. He envied that he could do whatever he wanted, unlike himself. Basically, he wouldn't be allowed to do anything he wanted. His father didn't allow him to throw stones on the roof or trees, not even leaves. He didn't allow him to study those messy things. After the teachers left, they didn't hire anyone to teach him. Instead, they sent books to him every day for him to read. If it weren't for Emingzu, he wouldn't be here now. Li Yi's words made Emingzu unable to say what she had prepared. After a moment, she looked at him and asked, "What if my father decrees to let you enter the court as an official? You're not really going to do that, are you?" Li Yi looked at her with a vigilant face. It was 8 dishes and 1 soup. He had worked so hard to give her a farewell dinner. In the end, not only was she not grateful, but she also repaid his kindness with ingratitude. Were all princesses so unreasonable? Li Yi put down his chopsticks, looked at her and said, "Please spare me. You know better than me how complicated and dark the imperial court is. If I go there, I'll be swallowed up within a few days and not even my bones will be left. I won't have to trouble you to collect my corpse." Being a county officer was the limit of what he could accept. He had never entered the court, but how could Li Yi not know that China had thousands of years of history? It was a place that devoured people. Li Yi didn't think that he could do better than those old foxes who had lived for decades. Those who could climb to that position were all shrewd people. That was his bottom line. If the emperor really wanted to do that, he wouldn't hesitate to run away immediately. He didn't have much sense of belonging to the Jing kingdom. It didn't matter where he lived. If he really couldn't do it, he could occupy a mountain and become a king. That was also a good choice. Anyway, his family had experience in doing that kind of thing. He could just go back to his old business. It was said that the Northwest was seriously affected by bandits. In the deep mountains there were bandits and horses everywhere. The government couldn't reach there at all. At worst, he could go there and become a king of bandits. He didn't forget his original intention and pursue his original dream. Emingzi didn't know how to refute. She wanted to say that the court was not as dark as he imagined, but it was against her conscience to say it. She thought carefully. With Li Yi's character, he was fine in other places. Once he entered the court, he might really be eaten up like he said. That place was the battlefield of the rich and noble. There were no weapons, but it was more tragic than a real battlefield. It involved a lot of people. Even her father couldn't do anything about it. It would hurt him if he went to the court. Could it be that she was wrong from the beginning? Seeing Li Yi and Li Xian fighting on the plate again, Mingzu smiled complacently. She picked up the chopsticks and picked up the last vegetable on the plate. She was lost in thought. Chapter 255. Haha, what crown prince? Li Xian was drunk. With his alcohol tolerance, no matter how low the alcohol content was, he would still get drunk if he drank too much. He hooked his arm around Li Yi's shoulder and mumbled, "To be honest, I'm still envious of you. You don't have anyone to discipline you and you can do whatever you want. Why don't we switch? Swap your sister." Li Yi pushed him to the side. Everyone had their own difficulties. With the identity of the royal family, at least they would not be bullied by others. How could they be like a commoner like him? Senior Han, Squire Zhao and whatnot, who would want to step on them for no reason? What was the point of living a good life? When he turned his head, he saw Mingzu looking at him with a frown. He just said it casually and didn't realize that the protagonist was sitting beside him. In order to cover up the awkwardness, he raised the wine glass in front of him and gestured to her. "We're leaving tomorrow. This glass of wine is for you." He raised his head and drank it in one gulp. His mouth was full of spiciness without a hint of sweetness. After he swallowed it, he felt like a ball of fire was burning in his stomach. This taste was definitely not grape wine. "You took the wrong glass." Mingzu looked at him and said coldly. Li Yi held onto the table and felt the whole world shake a little. One princess turned into two. Knowing that his alcohol tolerance was poor and that he wouldn't be able to drink this thing in 2 lifetimes, Li Yi never drank the strong alcohol that he brewed himself. When his head was dizzy, Li Xian came over again and said mysteriously, "Let me tell you, that girl from the Wang family is as beautiful as a flower. It's not an exaggeration to say that she's so beautiful that even the birds will be captivated and the flowers will be shameful. She's not any worse than your wife. The Wang family has a good background. The Wang family is one of the top 5 aristocratic families in the Jing kingdom. They only have one precious daughter. If you marry her, you will get unimaginable benefits. What? Do you want to consider it?" Li Xian was trying to persuade Li Yi to swap identities with him. He didn't want wealth or glory, nor did he want the beautiful crown princess. He was already sick of being controlled by others. What was worse was that even his favorite research had been banned by his father. The person he envied the most was Li Yi. If he could live his life, he wouldn't hesitate to give up his current position. Although Li Yi was a little dizzy, he was still conscious. He looked at Li Xian with pity. This child must have been suppressed recently. Otherwise he wouldn't have such unrealistic thoughts. "Drink some water to sober up." Mingzu handed him a bowl of water. "Thank you," Li Yi replied. He was a little dizzy after drinking 1 cup. He had to find a way to increase his alcohol tolerance in the future. He picked up the bowl and drank it in 1 gulp. His stomach felt like it was on fire again. Li Yi's face twisted. He pointed at her. His tears were almost choked by the big mouthful of strong alcohol. "How much more ability do you have?" Mingzu looked at him. The light in her beautiful eyes was unfathomable. Li Xian had already fallen under the table. His eyes were closed and his mouth was still mumbling non-stop. Li Yi couldn't hear what Mingzu was saying. His head was dizzy. If he didn't have enough alcohol tolerance, it was better not to touch the strong alcohol produced at home. He stood up and walked to his room unsteadily. The things in the room were almost moved out. There was a quilt left on the bed. It would be cold at night if he only covered himself with a quilt. At this time he couldn't care so much. He fell on the bed and slept. He didn't want to worry about the situation outside anymore. After a long time he was carried up from the bed in a daze. He smelled the familiar fragrance on Rui's body. He didn't want to open his eyes. He heard her whisper, "Husband, it's cold here. I'll sleep when I go home." Then his body became light. When he woke up the next day he saw that the bamboo pipe was connected to the outside through the window. He rubbed his head and sat on the bed in a daze. There was no such thing in Rui House. He remembered that after he fell on the bed yesterday, it was now when he woke up. When did he get home? After a while he thought of something. Rui had been there yesterday. So he was carried back by her? After figuring out the reason, Li Yi felt a little embarrassed. Shouldn't this kind of thing be done by men? It was the opposite in his home. The women in the family couldn't be too domineering. Otherwise, it would affect the harmony of the family. When he was thinking about this, Rui had already fetched hot water and walked in. Seeing him sitting on the bed, she said softly, "Husband, you're awake. Wash up first." Seeing her like this, Li Yi threw all his thoughts to the back of his mind. The word domineering should never be used to describe her. He was a little glad that Rui was his sister. If it were Rui, it would be difficult for him to live to the end of his life. He dipped the willow branch in salt to clean his teeth. He rinsed his mouth, soaped his hands and face, rubbed them for a while, rinsed them with water and dried them. He felt much more refreshed. Rui poured the dirty water outside. Xiaohuan used to do these things. Since Li Yi was injured last time, she did these things more frequently. When she walked to the door, she seemed to think of something and said, "By the way, Arrestor Li seems to be leaving. Husband, don't you want to go out and see?" When Li Yi walked out of the door, there were already a few carriages parked in front of the courtyard. A few armed men were tying up the goods on the carriages tightly. Shun Liang was also in the crowd. He was much more energetic than the first time they met. The clothes on him were probably worth only a few taels of silver. The woman called Yun Yang was holding his arm with a happy look on her face. If Emingzu wanted to return to the capital, it was impossible for her to bring him along. This kind of person would be a pillar of the country if used well. If not, he would be a terrorist. No matter which possibility it was, he had to be firmly controlled by the country. Losing his freedom in exchange for a lot of things. It was hard to say whether it was good or bad. Everyone's choice was different. Looking at the smile on his face, he should be very satisfied with the current situation. A luxurious carriage was parked on the other side of the gate. A slender hand lifted the curtains of the carriage, revealing a face that made Li Yi slightly startled. Emingzu had always been dressed unisex. She was wearing a constable's uniform, just like a man. Li Yi did not see her as a woman from the bottom of his heart. He had seen her in palace attire at the Ningguang residence. However, it was dark at night and he could not see clearly. This was the first time she appeared in front of him in the appearance of a woman. He had to admit that regardless of gender, the appearance of those with the surname Li was not bad. Li Xian, Emingzu, and of course himself. "Why do you also want to return to the capital with me?" Seeing that Li Yi kept staring at her, Mingzhu's face showed a rare blush as she looked at him and said, "Have a safe journey." Li Yi gave her his most heartfelt blessing and entered the door in a flash. Bang! The door was slammed shut and the latch was also locked from the inside. "Let's go." Emingzu looked deeply at the closed door and said, "Go." The man on the carriage shook the reins. The carriage slowly started and drove into the distance. "Princess, are you really not going to bring that brat?" In the spacious carriage, the old woman looked at Emingzu and asked in confusion. After a long time, she sighed and said, "Forget it." The old woman nodded and did not say anything else. The carriage returned to silence. Li Yi looked at the carriage disappearing from his sight through the gap in the door and also sighed. If she was not a princess, the two of them could actually become good friends. Unfortunately, there was no if. Chapter 256. By the time Li Yi opened the door, he could no longer see the group of people in the distance. He did not know if he would be able to see them again after today's parting. These days, etiquette was very strict. Girls from rich families would not easily show their faces in public. Li Yi did not believe that the royal family would allow a princess to be a constable for the rest of her life. Although she had said that she would return after the new year, Li Xian had told him that the possibility of that happening was almost negligible. She had returned to the capital this time because of the pressure from the capital. According to Li Xian, the officials in the imperial censorate were about to go crazy. She was a dignified princess, but instead of staying in the palace, she went to a place hundreds of miles away to become a constable. If it weren't for the fact that an imperial censor had accidentally discovered her, everyone would still be in the dark. In the past few days there were many memorials to the throne. Other than reprimanding the princess, there were other voices. A 17-year-old princess should have been married a few years ago. Even in the past few hundred years, there were not many princesses who got married at such a late age. As a member of the royal family, it was necessary to set an example for the people. If the princess was still unmarried at the age of 17, did she want all the women in the world to follow her example and stay at home as a leftover woman? If all the women married at such a late age, how could the country's population increase? How could the Jing kingdom become powerful? Since ancient times, the imperial censors were not afraid of causing trouble for others, especially for the royal family. With a few words, they could elevate a small matter to the height of politics. If it was not handled well, the etiquette would collapse and the country would not be far from being destroyed. It was obvious that Her Royal Highness was in trouble. Who knew if she would throw a few bombs at the censorate when she returned and send them all to heaven? She could even announce to the public that the heavens did not approve of their behavior and sent down divine punishment. This matter was not for Li Yi to worry about. Her Royal Highness was not someone who would suffer losses. He believed that she would be able to handle it herself. However, she did not bring up the matter of him going to the capital with her. This made Li Yi feel that the farewell banquet was not in vain. After standing at the door for a while, a relaxed expression returned to his face. He shook his head and walked into the courtyard. Everyone had their own lives. This was just an interlude. Life had to go on. He promised Xiao Huan that the next time it snowed, he would make a snowman that looked exactly like her. However, looking at the recent weather, the little servant girl might have to wait for a long time. Even if he couldn't make a snow sculpture, he could still draw a portrait. When she came out just now, he had asked her to wash up, put on her prettiest clothes and dress herself up carefully. He even asked her to put on the gold and jade hairpin that she was usually reluctant to wear in her hair. Hearing that she could also have such a painting, the young maidservant was overjoyed. She looked forward to it even more than the snowman. After all, the snowman would melt when the weather was clear, but the son-in-law's painting would be preserved forever. Although she really wanted a snowman that looked exactly like her, she would just have to beg the son-in-law the next time it snowed. Xiao Huan stood under a winter-sweet tree in the courtyard. Li Yi picked up the brush and traced on the paper. Rui had just come out to see it. Li Yi felt that he could not favor one and discriminate against the other. After Xiao Huan got the painting, he asked her to call Rui out as well. Why did Mississippi Lu want it? Didn't she already have one? Why did she ask for it? The posture of holding the sword must be imposing, and it would be best if it could be painted with the feeling of a grandmaster. Who knew what a grandmaster looked like? Li Yi now felt more and more that second granduncle had the temperament of a real grandmaster. The more powerful a person was, the more ordinary he looked. For example, the divine monk sweeping the floor could fight two peerless master pros alone as if it was a game. Second granduncle, who was deaf and liked to take advantage of others, could also be a boss-like figure in the martial arts world. Of course, if he painted Mississippi Lu with the temperament of second granduncle, the price would be too high. He might not be able to bear the consequences of doing so. After finishing 3 paintings in a row, his wrist was a little sore. Mississippi Lu was still not satisfied and raised doubts about Li Yi's painting skills. He was too lazy to pay attention to her. It was just that he smashed the snow sculpture that looked more like her last time. Why was she still holding it in her heart and liked to find fault with him? Women were too vengeful. He should not provoke them as much as he could. The weather was good today. Lying on the rocking chair, sunbathing and thinking about things, Xiao Huan ran over and told him that the old storyteller in the brothel was looking for him. Why was old Sun looking for him? Could it be that he encountered some problems in the brothel that he could not solve? Recently, Li Yi had been preparing to discuss some things with him. He did not expect that he would come to him so soon. Old Sun did not come alone. A 15 or 16-year-old youth followed behind him. He was carrying a heavy bag on his shoulder. He was unfamiliar with the unfamiliar environment, so his expression was a little timid. Did the brothel encounter any difficulties? Looking at Old Sun's expression, it did not seem like something serious had happened. Li looked at him and asked. Speaking of the brothel, the old man's face broke into a smile. He said, "Young master, don't worry. The business in the brothel is very good. Yesterday there were 5 performances and every one of them was full. It seems that there will only be more people in the next few days." Without waiting for Li Yi to speak again, Old Sun turned around and waved to the youth. He said, "Hurry up and give it to me." The youth hurriedly put down the bag on his back. Old Sun put the coarse cloth bag in front of Li Yi. Li Yi heard a clattering sound, which meant that it was filled with copper coins. The old man said with a smile, "These are the rewards we received yesterday. There are also some silver and jade items that were all exchanged for copper coins. There are 5 strings of coins in total, and this is 3 strings of coins." 3 strings of coins was nothing to the current Li Yi, but this number still surprised him. It was 1,000 coins a day. It was not surprising that Rui Brothel could earn 10 times that amount in a day. After all, the people who went in and out of the shop were all rich people. However, a small brothel could earn 5 strings of coins in a day, and it was just relying on rewards. It looked like he had underestimated the popularity of stage plays in this world. There was still a lot of room for exploration in this industry. It should be known that in the future the entertainment industry would be a treasure trove of gold. If they could groom a few nationally known stars, they could do nothing but walk around and accept commercial performances, hold concerts and so on. Wouldn't they earn a lot of money? His thinking seemed to be a little off. The status of actors here was low, and they couldn't be compared to the stars in the future. If he wanted to turn his dreams into reality, he first had to change the hierarchy of this world. Li Yi knew that he didn't have the ability to do that. Thinking about what Old Sun said, he realized another problem. He looked at him and said, "We agreed to split it 40-60. I'll take 40 and you take 60. It should be 2 strings of coins. Remember to take one from here when you go back. Don't make a mistake in the future." Old Sun shook his head. "No mistake. We thought about it and felt that 60% was too much. We don't feel at ease. We will split it like this in the future. Please don't reject it, young master." No one would complain about having too little money, and Old Sun was no exception. The reason why they agreed to split 60-40 was because they didn't know that this thing could be so profitable. They could earn 5 strings of coins in a day. If it was in the past, they wouldn't even be able to earn that much in a month. With a pile of copper coins in front of them, everyone felt at ease. However, if they were to take 60%, they would probably feel uneasy. Everyone knew how the money was earned. If they wanted to continue earning money in the future, they couldn't do without a good story. If they wanted to earn money at ease, they couldn't take the majority. There are people who think they have too much money and give it away. Li Yi looked at Old Sun with a surprised expression. Chapter 257. Old Sun put down the coins and left. As soon as Li Yi invited him in for a cup of tea, he was politely rejected. The 15 or 16-year-old young man followed behind the old man and didn't look back at the coins. Although 3 coins were a lot, they didn't belong to them. There were dozens of coins in his pocket. This was the only large sum of money he had ever held. When the female ghost appeared on the stage, he was responsible for releasing the smoke behind the scenes. This was his wages. When he went back later, he could buy a stick of candied hawthorn on the street. He didn't want to spend the rest of the money to marry a wife. He had wanted to eat candied hawthorn for a long time. He couldn't bear to buy a stick of 5 copper coins, so he bought a stick of 3 copper coins. He ate half of it today and kept the other half for tomorrow. His grandfather said that in a few days, if there was a suitable role, he could also show his face on the stage. His heart was nervous and looking forward to it. In the past, he was only an assistant and had never really stood on the stage to perform. After watching the old man and the young man walk out of the door after a long time, Li Yi remembered that he still had something to discuss with him. At this time, the old man was already gone, and the matter wasn't that urgent. They could talk about it next time. In the past, he didn't pay much attention to the brothel. It was just a place to kill time in his spare time. Now he didn't think so anymore. It was a treasure land that was neglected and no one cared about. The internet was still a very distant thing in this era. It would only appear in its embryonic form after hundreds or thousands of years. There were no platforms for ordinary people to discuss, such as Tieba or Weibo. To a large extent, the brothel played such a role. Recently, Li Yi also realized that it was a huge force. It was the source of public opinion and the intersection of all kinds of information. His soul was thousands of years ahead, so he knew how powerful this thing was. Wherever public opinion went, people could kill without leaving a trace. Even raising flags and changing dynasties couldn't avoid this place. It was just that most people didn't realize it yet. The destruction of the Han family was caused by Wu Heir and a few storytellers. Rather than saying that Senior Han was killed by his concubine for the sake of his wealth, it would be more accurate to say that he was killed by the evil warding sword manual that didn't exist in the first place. If he had grasped this power in his hands earlier, he would have made his move before the bandits reached Qing and Prefecture. Then he wouldn't have ended up in such a sorry state. Originally, he was just doing it out of convenience within the scope of his ability to help these poor people living at the bottom of society, but he did not expect that it would also bring him a lot of profit. Of course, the most important role was the role that he had neglected in the beginning. For the time being, he had not considered revolting. It was something that he did in passing and did not require much investment. Who knew when it might come in handy? As for how to do it, he had to think about it carefully. After his afternoon nap was disturbed by Old Sun, he didn't feel sleepy at all. He was still lying on the rocking chair with his eyes closed. Without Little Boss by his side, his body and mind were relaxed. Li Yi felt that he was getting lazier. A dull sound of footsteps came from afar. Xiao Huan couldn't make such a sound even if she stamped her feet on the ground. Besides, she wouldn't come to disturb him when he was sunbathing. He didn't need to open his eyes to know that it was Fong. Fong seemed to be in a low mood recently. When asked, he wouldn't say what had happened. He suspected that he had a conflict with his wife at home, but it didn't seem like it. If they had a conflict, it was usually Fong who was whipped by his wife with a broom in her hand. After one night, it was as if nothing had happened. It was like this every time. He didn't know how they reconciled in private. This time was obviously different. Fang walked in front, and Fang's wife followed behind. Both of them didn't look very good. Seeing that the situation was not right, Li Yi immediately sat up from the rocking chair. The situation didn't seem very good. Looking at Fang's wife's expression, could it be that the matter between Fang and Miss Hong in Jade Courtyard was exposed and he was caught in the act? He had already warned him to do things cleanly, but this guy kept saying that he and Miss Hong were innocent. Now he had made a big mistake, hadn't he? Before Li Yi could ask, Fang's wife pointed at Fang and said with a livid face, "Fang the third, do you still want to live like this?" Fang's face also darkened and he said, "You're a woman. What do you know? Go home." Fang's wife didn't give in at all. She said, "You have no conscience. We can't live like this anymore." Poor mother and daughter. It was over. It seemed that the matter had been exposed. Was Fang planning to elope with Miss Hong? Or was he going to welcome her back home? Li Yi immediately came to a conclusion in his heart. Fang's face was livid and he didn't speak. Li Yi glared at him, walked to Fang's wife and said, "Sister-in-law, don't worry. I'll make the decision for you. If he dares to bring Miss Hong home, I'll put him in prison and let him reflect for 10 days to half a month." Miss Hong? Fang's wife was stunned. She looked at Li Yi and asked in confusion, "What Miss Hong?" Fang's face was also livid. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and he began to be a little unsteady on his feet. Li Yi looked at the puzzled expression on Fang's wife's face. He looked back at Fang and found that he was winking at him. Li Yi's expression didn't change. He turned back and continued, "Sister-in-law, you don't know this. This Miss Hong is a performer in the brothel. Her singing skills are first class. Fang said that you like to listen to songs, so he must buy Miss Hong and let her sing for you every day. How much money do you think it will cost? How can ordinary people afford it? But don't blame him. After all, he is also kind. If you don't want to buy her, then don't. We're a family, so there's no need to hurt the harmony." Fang's wife's face softened a little, but she still glared at Fang and said, "We only have a few taels of silver at home and you're so arrogant. You want to buy a performer to sing for you. Is that something we can afford? We need another mouth to feed at home and there are no extra rooms. You're such a prodigal." Although it was a reprimand, her tone was much softer than before. Fang smiled embarrassedly, tacitly agreeing with what Li Yi had just said. Li Yi also wiped the sweat in his heart. Fortunately, he was quick-witted. Otherwise, he would have to go to Fang's grave every year on this day to burn a few incense sticks and remove the weeds. The misunderstanding was resolved. Fang's wife said that it was fine to go to the brothel to listen to the songs. After all, they were not a rich family and couldn't afford to keep performers. Fang took the initiative to admit his mistake. The couple lived in harmony. If it weren't for Li Yi standing in the middle and ruining their world, the atmosphere would have been even more perfect. Fang put a medium-sized bag in Li Yi's hand, looked at his wife and said, "We'll take the money that we should take. You can't touch a penny that we shouldn't take. I'll make the decision on this matter. You don't have to worry about it anymore." The woman's lips moved, but she finally nodded and didn't say anything. "What is it?" Li Yi was puzzled by what he heard. Fang looked at him and explained, "This is the share of the Rui Du and liquor. You can take it back, son-in-law. Although it's good to be able to earn money while lying in bed without doing anything, I don't feel at ease with this money." Li Yi opened the bag and there was a dazzling white light inside. He was a little stunned. What was going on today? Why did everyone line up to give money? Chapter 258. Fang felt that money earned while lying on the bed was not peaceful. Li Yi did not agree with this statement. Earning money while lying on the bed was also a kind of ability. With Fang's physique, he would definitely have a bright future in this industry. Although compared to the future, the overall atmosphere of today's society was more conservative, as long as he stood on the street holding a sign, he would definitely attract many lonely noblewomen who would send their maids to secretly give him an invitation. Finally, he knew why old Fang had been depressed for the past few days. He was purely idle. "Do you know why this money is not peaceful for you?" Li looked at him and asked. Fang looked up at Li Yi with a confused expression. "Have you ever seen second uncle sit under the tree outside and take a nap for the whole day?" Li looked at him and asked. Fang nodded. These days he would occasionally sit under the tree and stare blankly. Second uncle would take a nap for the whole day and he would stare blankly for the whole day. However, why did the son-in-law ask him this? "Have you ever seen Mrs. Su go out early in the morning and come back late at night carrying candied haws?" Li continued to ask. Fang nodded again. Although Rui Lu's profits were greater, some women were bored at home and would go out every day to sell candied haws without a break. Have you ever seen the sun rise from the east roof and set from the west roof? Li finally asked. The expression on Fang's face was even more puzzled. He did not know why the son-in-law asked these things, but he still nodded mechanically. This is where your problem lies. Li Yi threw the bag of money to him and said, "Why are you looking at things all day instead of working hard? Take the money back and call a few people over later. There's work, and don't think about being idle in the future." Li Yi realized that not everyone could be as carefree and at ease as he was. For people like old Fang, he had to find something for him to do in order to be at peace. The closer it was to the end of the year, the colder the weather became. He lit the stove in the room, but it was still so cold that he couldn't even stretch out his hand. He planned to make a Kong in the kitchen. Almost every house in the northern countryside had this thing. It was usually connected to the bottom of the stove. There was no need to deliberately add firewood to the fire. The heat generated from cooking every day was enough to keep the house warm for an entire day. If there was no warmth before going to bed at night, Grandma would bring a large pile of firewood, straw, or corn stalks from outside. Within a few minutes, her body would be warm. Because of this thing, when he lived in the countryside when he was young, he never had to worry about keeping warm in the winter. He would stay on the Kong for the whole winter, eating and sleeping on it. This situation continued until he graduated from primary school. Ever since he went to middle school and moved from the countryside to the city, he never slept on the Kong again. It was winter and they had nothing to do. The whole family sat on the Kong and played cards to kill time. Fang soon came over with his men. There were more than a dozen families living in the stockade now. All of them stayed by his side in times of crisis. Li didn't treat them badly. He had already given them shares of Ruidu's profits. Recently he raised the shares of each family a little. These men had been very idle these days. After they moved out of the stockade they had nothing to do. The candied haws were a small business now. It was run by the family's in-laws and relatives. It was not appropriate for a man to get involved. Taking care of a child at home was not something a man should do. Fang only said that his son-in-law had something to do, and they all came over. It was just a Kong and 2 or 3 people were enough. With Fang and his men's labor they could make it today. The kitchen couldn't even accommodate more than a dozen people gathered together. Including Fang, there were 5 people left here. The others went back with a look of regret. Before they left, they even discussed with Fang and his men whether they could change, but Fang firmly refused. "Son-in-law, tell me, what are you going to do this time?" Fang rolled up his sleeves. At this time, even if Li Yi asked him to climb a mountain of swords and plunge into a sea of fire to chop people on the street with a kitchen knife, he would probably do it. There was something to do, money was safe, and the knot in his heart was untied. Fang was revived on the spot. After knowing that the 6 men were busy in the kitchen, Fang's excitement was obviously reduced. He thought that they were going to do something big, but he found that the gap between his ideal and reality was too big. 2 of them went outside to buy bricks and stones, and the rest of them dismantled the original stove. The stove also needed to be changed. It was not easy to make a stove at this time. Xiao Huan was often choking in the kitchen and crying. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't light the fire. Because the ventilation was not good, when she lit the fire, she had to keep pulling the bellows next to her. It was very laborious. When Li Yi was a child, the stove at home was also like this. His favorite thing to do was to go to the stove and help her add firewood and pull the bellows when his grandmother was cooking. Later, when the kitchen was rebuilt, it was changed to the new stove promoted by the state. Without the bellows, the ventilation was better, the ignition was faster, and it saved more materials. However, he couldn't find the feeling of giggling and pulling the bellows hard when he was a child. The Kong should be connected to the stove, which was basically the structure in the countryside at that time. When he was a child, he saw the craftsman build this thing, but when he recalled it now, of course it was impossible. After finding the drawings, Fang and the others violently dismantled the stove. After cleaning out the garbage, he had already drawn the drawings, including the specific size of each structure. This thing looked simple, but the size couldn't be wrong. If it was a little higher or a little shorter, there would be problems. "Young master, what is this thing?" Fang took the drawings back and forth, but he couldn't see anything. He scratched his head and looked at Li Yi and asked, "As long as you put this thing in your kitchen, Zhuzi won't complain about being cold at night?" Li Yi said simply and straightforwardly if he explained too much to Fang. "Okay, I'll do it tomorrow." Fang never doubted Li Yi's words. He heard from his young master that this thing was as warm as summer when he lay on it. At night, he could hug his wife and baby and sleep on this Kong, which was quite beautiful. "Old Sue, it's a deal. Tomorrow I'll also get this thing for my house. Remember to come and help. If your house also wants to do it, call me." He patted the shoulder of a man next to him and said. When he was dismantling the stove, he wiped the black ash on his hands. Immediately, a big palm print appeared on old Sue's outer shirt. Fong's butt was kicked. The man scolded, "Son of a bitch, this was just washed by my wife. It's not easy to dry clothes in cold weather. When I go back she will scold me again." Fong patted his butt and was not angry. He laughed and said, "Your wife is spoiled. If she dares to scold me she will slap her." Old Sue laughed and said, "I don't know who was beaten by his wife with a broom in the yard yesterday. By the way, who is Miss Hong? Why have I never heard you mention her? When did you hook up with her?" Fong's face suddenly turned red as if it was about to drip blood. In old Sue's proud eyes he kicked him. "Fong Laos, and how dare you hit me? If you say one more word about Miss Hong, I will beat you again." "Okay, I can't beat you. I'll go and ask your wife what is going on with Miss Hong." Old Sue sneered and strode outside. Fong was stunned for a moment. His face changed greatly and he immediately chased after him. His voice came from afar. "Old Sue, brother Sue, don't. Let's talk about it," Xiao Huan mumbled as she walked in from outside. She blinked her big eyes at Li Yi and asked, "Young master, who is Miss Xiao Hong?" Before Li Yi could answer, she could only find a familiar figure in her kitchen. It was still fine in the morning. She said in a panic, "How did our kitchen become like this?" Chapter 259. After explaining to the little maid for a long time, she finally believed that her kitchen did not attract evil thieves. Unable to find the money, she tore down the stove to vent her anger. Thinking about it, which stupid thief would look for valuable things in the kitchen? Her private money was all locked in a small box, and even the valuable jewelry bought by the son-in-law was all locked in it, hidden under the small bed in the room. She carried the key with her every day so it would not be lost. What was more, first miss and second miss were at home and no thief could come in. She was afraid that if she just sneaked into the house, before she had time to take a breath, Uncle Fong would break her legs and send her to the yamen. The treasure box was under the bed so it was very safe. But without the stove, where should she cook today? She would not worry about this later because the son-in-law said that after the new stove was built, it would not be so difficult to light a fire, and it would not always give out smoke, which made her run out several times to cook. It was said that it could also save firewood. Behind the stove there was a big bed which could sleep 4 people. The big bed was connected to the stove so it was warm at any time every day. When there was nothing to do during the day they could sit on it to keep warm. Xiao Huan imagined the scene of the whole family sleeping on the big bed, and her little face immediately turned red. Ignoring the blushing Xiao Huan who was lost in her thoughts, the little girl just liked to let her imagination run wild. Lao Feng and Lao Su had their arms around each other's shoulders and were playing with the mud outside. They did not look like they were at each other's throats just now. Seeing the flattering expression on his face, Li Yi knew that Feng was finished. His weakness was caught, and his status among the brothers would definitely plummet in the future. There might really be a Miss Hong in the Jade Courtyard, and it seemed that she had known Feng for a long time even before she knew him. In the past, his family was so poor that they could not eat, so it was impossible for them to know each other through prostitution. But every time he mentioned Miss Hong, Feng would blush and stammer. The relationship between them was definitely not as simple as a pure man and a woman. In any case, this was Feng's family business. Although Li Yi was full of curiosity, he did not say it, and he would not break the casserole to ask. Walking out of the yard, they did not go far before they heard the sound of reading from a small yard next to them. It was Qin Qing teaching the children. A yard in the house was specially made as a school. Originally there were 2 rooms. After removing the middle wall there was a big classroom and the small yard outside was the playground. Although there were not many students to begin with, there were only about 20 girls, and it was enough to occupy 1 room. Mr. Qin, who had broken his leg and could only lie on the bed, said that it would be better for the school to be brighter and more comfortable for the children to sit in. Lao Feng and the others did not hesitate to tear down the wall in the middle. As early as in Willow Leaf Village, Mr. Qin was the teacher of the school. Of course, at that time, only children with the surname Liu were qualified to go to school. During the days when Li Yi was the teacher, under the attraction of Sun Wukong, the number of children from poor families gradually increased. Now the position of teacher was handed over to Qin Qing. It could be seen that she was very diligent and was born to be a teacher. There were more than 20 children in the big house. As long as they were of the right age, she went to visit their homes and let them go to school. This was a good thing. Children were very naughty. In the past, they ran wild in the village, went into the river to catch crabs, climbed trees to dig out bird nests, and never made people feel at ease. Now that they moved here, they did not have to do these things anymore. The prefectural city was full of crooks and honest people. If they did not let them go out to play, the house would be turned upside down. No parent did not have a headache. Little Chin could help them look after their children, so there was no parent who wouldn't be willing. If the naughty child was playful and didn't want to go to school, they would slap him on the butt and ask if he wanted to go. If he didn't want to go, they would slap him again. After a few more slaps, he would be willing. At first, she thought she was looking for someone to look after the child, but a few days later, when the woman was playing with the money, the naughty child proudly pointed at a pile of copper coins and said that she had lost wrongly. 7 copper coins plus 8 copper coins should be 15 copper coins, not 14. The woman was stunned for a moment and gave the naughty child a good beating. 7 plus 8 was 14. She had remembered it clearly since she was young, so how could it be wrong? Counting his fingers and toes again, he realized that he had counted incorrectly. Surprised, she asked the naughty child when he learned to count. The naughty child teared up and said that it was Mr. Chin who taught him. The woman gave the naughty child a few copper coins and told him to buy some good food. Carrying the gift, she went to Chin Ching's house. They had to thank little Chin. Both she and the child's father were boorish people and didn't know a single word. The pile of copper coins at home could only be counted for fun. If they were asked for specific numbers, they would be dumbfounded. But now, their child had only been in school for a few days and already knew how to count. If he knew a few more words, not only would he not have to take the county examination, even if his family met with a disaster in the future, he wouldn't have to starve to death. There had never been a case of a cultured person starving to death. Generations of people couldn't even read a few words. Their great-grandfather generation only knew how to use a saber to kill. Who would have thought that a cultured person would actually appear here? Their ancestral tombs were really emitting green smoke. The families who had sent their children to school all ran to Chin Ching's house. They were not stingy at all with rice and meat. How could they not bring some gifts? Fong carried a stove and went in. The chimney was made of hollow bamboo and tied tightly together. From then on, this new type of stove had successfully been installed in all the families in the house. The honeycomb briquette was also ready. Uncle Han made a mold and pulled over a few carts of coal powder. Soon, the briquettes with holes on them were piled in front of each family's house. When Li Yi walked into Uncle Han's house, the old man was sitting in the yard, busy. It seemed that he was old and couldn't stay idle. Every time he came to Uncle Han's house, he had work to do. Only second uncle was different. Other than sunbathing and eating, there seemed to be nothing else that could interest him. "Young master, what are you making this time?" Hearing footsteps coming from the yard, Uncle Han raised his head and asked with a smile. He had spent his whole life as a carpenter, but he could only make wooden knives and wooden spears for naughty children. He felt a little regretful. He could only make the best use of his skills in Uncle Han's house. Since he had nothing to do, Uncle Han liked to make those strange things that Uncle Han asked him to make. However, Uncle Han was too polite. He gave money every time and often asked Xiao Huan to send rice and noodles over. The old man was the only one in the house. The silver biscuits hidden under the water tank in the kitchen could not be used up in this lifetime. Li Yi was actually embarrassed to trouble Uncle Han every time. However, Uncle Han was the only one around who had this skill. Besides, it was not easy for him to live alone. He definitely wouldn't want to give money to the old man for no reason. He could only find something for him to do from time to time. When he gave money, he had to have a legitimate reason. Looking at the old man, he smiled and said, "Just some small things." As he said that, he took out the drawing in his arms. Looking at the small squares on it, Uncle Han smiled and said, "Young master, you don't have to worry about it. I can make it in 2 days at most. It's not difficult to make these small squares. It's just that my eyes are not good now. I'm afraid that you have to find a young man with good eyesight to carve the words on it. Uncle Han, you just need to get these small squares out. I'll find someone else to carve the words," Li Yi said with a smile. Ever since he saw that Li Yi could use a sword to carve words on the wall that were the size of a fingernail, and her speed was so fast that Li Yi couldn't even see it clearly with his eyes, Li Yi felt that the job of carving on mahjong would belong to her. Chapter 260. Men from poor families were all good at everything. Raising pigs and horses, farming, building walls, and building houses, there was nothing they couldn't do. Farming was a skill to make a living. If they didn't have money to hire a craftsman to build a house, they had to do it themselves. This was a skill passed down from generation to generation. Those who didn't learn it would have starved or frozen to death. Fong and the others moved very quickly. In just half a day, the stove and Kong that Li Yi wanted had already appeared in the kitchen. After measuring it, the size was exactly the same as his drawing. There was no problem with the principle. The kang that had just been made couldn't be burned immediately. Otherwise it would crack. This problem wouldn't exist after 2 days of drying. The stove and the kang were connected. Naturally, they couldn't cook during these 2 days. Li Yi originally planned to solve the problem of eating in a restaurant outside. He didn't expect this idea to be opposed by Xiao Huan and Rui. Although his family didn't lack that bit of money, which decent family would go to a restaurant every day to eat? That was something only prodigal sons and prodigals would do. Rui workshop wasn't far from here. The kitchen there didn't lack anything. They had cooked there yesterday. They could just eat in the shop for the next 2 days. Li didn't have any objections. The brothel was just next to Rui workshop. He could discuss things with old man Sun on the way. Fang had already brought a few people to smash his own stove. He didn't even consider the problem of where they were going to eat today. The stove in the son-in-law's house had been smashed. How could his house not be smashed? Those who didn't smash would be fools. Who didn't understand that if they followed in the footsteps of the son-in-law, they would have food to eat and money to earn. They had been living like this for the past few days. Otherwise they would still be living in the village on the mountain. When Li Yi and his family were preparing to go to Rui workshop, Mrs. Fang was pointing at Fang's nose and scolding. "You're such a glutton. The stove at home is broken. Where are you going to cook today?" Fang's mother-in-law was full of anger. She washed the vegetables and was about to cook, but this guy ran in and smashed the stove. She was almost scared to death. The mother and son in the family relied on this man to survive. If he was crazy or hysterical, she and Juzi would not be able to live. What's wrong with eating at the intoxicated fragrance restaurant for a couple of days? It's not like our family lacks this bit of money. Fang retorted. It would have been better if he didn't say it, but the moment he did, Mrs. Fang got even angrier. Do you feel uneasy with so much money at home so you're thinking of ways to give it away? This morning you wanted to buy a performer, and now you want to go to Drunken Fragrance restaurant for a meal. You'll have to spend a few taels to eat there. Why don't you take a look at the kind of people who eat there? Sooner or later the family's savings will be used up by you, Fang retorted again. When Li Yi walked to the door of the house, he saw a broom flying out from the yard of Fang's house. Sure enough, you can't judge a book by its cover. One was an iron man who wouldn't frown even if a knife cut his body, and the other was a seemingly virtuous and dignified peasant woman. Suddenly, the dignified and virtuous woman turned into a female Tyrannosaurus, and the indomitable man turned into a good-for-nothing. What a sin. Once again he sighed at his luck. Although when they first met, Rui smashed the solid wooden table in front of him, and he didn't know how much fiercer she was than Mrs. Fang, but for the rest of the time she was a good housekeeper, a gentle and virtuous ideal wife. Although there was still a veil between them, it was still better than. Thinking of Fang's wailing under the broom, he quickly threw that possibility out of his mind. It was still early and there was just a touch of white in the east. There were always reasons to get up late in winter. Most people were still sleeping in their warm beds and were unwilling to get up. There were not many people in the tiled houses. Who would come here to watch a show in the early morning? The open brothels were empty, and the doors of the wine shops and tea houses were closed. Only a figure occasionally walked out of the brothels. His footsteps were weak, and he was still thinking about how good the girl's kung fu was last night. In one of the brothels, Sun Yun, who had just turned 15, got up very early. He put the rag in the warm water and quickly wiped the tables and chairs. He needed to wipe the tables and chairs clean before the brothels opened. There couldn't be any dirt on them. Then he boiled the hot water so that he could prepare tea for the customers at any time. He was only wrapped in a thin jacket, but his forehead was covered with fine sweat. The young man's body was not afraid of the cold. After working for an hour, he only felt that his body was steaming hot, and he didn't feel cold at all. He didn't do this work for free. Sister Ruoqing said that if he could get up so early every day and finish wiping the tables and boiling the hot water, she would give him 10 copper coins. She would pay him once a day. Thinking about the dozens of copper coins lying in the small money bag that he secretly hid, he thought that one day he would be able to save enough money to marry a wife. He wouldn't need his old grandfather to worry about him anymore. His heart was full of energy and the frequency of his hands also increased. He didn't even notice that his grandfather had walked behind him. Old Sun walked over and looked at him lovingly. He said, "Xiao Yun, rest for a while. There are still 2 hours before the brothels open." Sun Yun turned his head and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He grinned, revealing his white teeth. He said, "Grandpa, I'm not tired. I'm almost done. I still have to boil the water later." Then he continued with the work at hand. There were only 2 sets of tables and chairs to be wiped. He could rest for a while when he boiled the water later. Looking at the child's quick movements, Old Sun's old face showed a gratified expression. A diligent child wouldn't starve to death. Even if he were to lie in a coffin one day, Xiao Yun could live on alone. Of course, before he found a wife for his child and settled his marriage, he wouldn't be willing to close his eyes. If he could live to the day he held a great-grandson, he would die with a smile on his face. Looking at the empty brothel, Old Sun's face showed a trace of a smile. It didn't matter that there was no one now. He knew that it wouldn't be long before this place would be full of customers. The painted skin could still be performed for a period of time. When the number of customers gradually decreased, the number of performances of the painted skin would be reduced, and Ying Ning and a Chinese ghost story could officially appear on the stage. With Li around, there would be no shortage of such good stories, and of course the customers' tips would not be less. As a wandering actor, when did the future become so worth looking forward to? When a person was immersed in beautiful things for too long, he couldn't help but think of some sad things. Yesterday, a brothel outside the city collapsed, and an old friend of many years was crushed under it. Although he wasn't seriously injured, his old bones were probably lying in bed for at least 10 days to half a month before he could get out of bed. He could be considered to have made a name for himself, but there were still countless actors who found it very difficult to live. In the past 2 days, countless old friends had come to him, hoping to make a living here. However, the number of people here was indeed saturated, so Old Sun could only helplessly shake his head and refuse. He had been wandering around for a lifetime, so he could understand the situation of most actors the best. If there was anything he could help them with, he would not hesitate to help. However, he was small and weak. In the big environment, he couldn't change anything at all. Early in the morning, there was not a single customer in the brothel. Only Old Sun was sitting in the corner in a daze. Li walked over. Old Sun heard the footsteps, raised his head, and hurriedly stood up. Li waved his hand and motioned him to sit down. He asked with a smile, "How was business yesterday?" Old Sun smiled and said, "Very good. The reward I received is a little more than the day before yesterday. I haven't had time to send it to you." Yesterday was the 2nd day of the painted skin stage play. Not only did the popularity not decrease, but it also rose. Old Sun had clearly felt that the space in the brothel was not enough. "Don't be so anxious. The money will be with you for now. You can pay me once every half a month or once a month." Li didn't come here early in the morning to ask for money. After a few greetings, he went straight to the point and said, "There is something I want to discuss with Old Sunday. Just call me Old Sunday." "What's the matter?" "Just tell me," Old Sun said hurriedly. "It's like this. You should have seen that this brothel can't accommodate many customers, so the profit is naturally not much. I want to recruit more actors and build such a brothel in and outside the city. I want to sign a contract with them. I can provide them with stories and scripts. As for how to distribute the profit, you can distribute it according to the proportion like we do, or you can give them a fixed monthly salary." Li looked at Old Sun and said, this wasn't an idea that came to him in the past 2 days. When Li saw the strange culture of the brothel for the first time, he had this idea. What he didn't lack were good stories and scripts. The library contained the essence of thousands of years of culture in Wuxia. It was almost inexhaustible, and he couldn't use it all in his life. After seeing the celebrities who made money so much that their hands cramped, and then looking back at their miserable predecessors, he always felt strange in his heart. Li was very interested in making a small change in this industry. In addition to this reason, he was also happy to see the poor people at the bottom of society live a better life. Many people were intoxicated by their graceful dance and long sleeves. They were the creators of art, but when people appreciated art, they imposed a lot of suffering and humiliation on the creators of art. This was unfair. Of course, there were some reasons that were not known to outsiders. When the entertainment industry in this world began to flourish, the lowly actors became the idols in people's hearts. A name written casually could be sold at a sky-high price. Wherever they went, they could hear the cheers of fans. People knew which actor's dance was the best in the world, and their singing was unparalleled. They didn't know who the emperor of the country was. This kind of scene always brought back some memories in the depths of his heart. Living in this world, both material and spiritual enjoyment were indispensable. When people were no longer hungry, they would pursue a higher level of spiritual pleasure. This could be seen from the painted skin stage play, which was always sold out. This was a huge cake, a cake that had not been noticed by people yet. He had to seize the opportunity before others discovered it. Of course, after recognizing the particularity of the brothel, Li Yi didn't intend to give up the opportunity to control the invisible power in his hands. This world was too unsafe. If he didn't have enough power in his hands, he could be crushed like an ant at any time. In the past few months, the peaceful life in Willow Leaf Village was gone forever. There had been earth-shaking changes. He always felt a little guilty if he still lived as carelessly as before. "Child, what did you just say?" The old man thought that he had heard it wrong, and even his voice was a little trembling. Before Li Yi spoke, he asked again, "Are you willing to accept those poor people who wander around and give them food?" The old man's voice was still a little trembling, for fear that he had misunderstood. Whether those wandering performers could fill their stomachs depended entirely on luck. If they met a generous customer, they wouldn't have to starve for a long time. If the customer only watched the performance and didn't give money, they would have to tighten their belts for the next few days. When did people from Lu Qi get a fixed salary? Li Yi was a little puzzled as to why the old man had suddenly become so agitated. Since the stage play Painted Skin had such good ratings, when Journey to the West and Legend of the White Snake came out, who knew how shocked these country bumpkins who had never seen the world would be? This was a business that would not lose money at all. It was too ridiculous to rely on other people's money to eat. Some people didn't even need to pay a penny to watch a performance. After watching, they left. No one thought that this method was unreasonable. Each person had one ticket and they could sit according to the number. It was so simple and convenient. If he wanted to completely change this industry, he couldn't do it overnight. He temporarily suppressed these thoughts and looked at the old man who was staring at him with excited eyes. He said, "What do you think about giving them 500 cents a month?" "That's too much, too much." Old man's son was so excited that his beard trembled. In this industry, it was already a blessing from the heavens to be able to eat their fill. Most people didn't even dare to dream of receiving 500 cents a month. If they didn't do this kind of good thing, they would be kicked in the head by a donkey. "You can discuss this with Miss Wan first. You can first call some people to try it out. It's not certain whether it will succeed or not. Remember to choose people who know everything. For now, don't send money over. You guys use my share first. If it's not enough, then we'll talk about it." Old man's son patted his chest and promised, "Don't worry, young master. Leave this matter to me. I will definitely do it properly for you." Old man's son's face turned red. This was a good thing for the many performers in Qing and Prefecture. He was very happy that these people in the same industry could have a meal. Li Yi raised his head and looked at the stage covered by the curtain. There was a look of anticipation in his eyes. This world's first entertainment company was about to take its first step. Chapter 261. The dozen people here are our original team. You've been with them for a long time. If some of them are smart, you can ask them to be responsible for the newly built venues outside. Of course, it doesn't matter if they are not smart. As long as they are down to earth and willing to work, they can learn these things slowly. Li Yi pinched a piece of osmanthus cake, put it in his mouth and told his plan to Wan Ruoqing. It's not a solution to live on rewards all the time. In a few days, number the chairs. When they watch the performance in the future, one person will have one ticket, and they will sit according to the number. You can decide the ticket price. The higher the seats are, the more expensive it will be. When all the seats are sold out, start to sell the standing tickets, and the price can be lower. Wan Ruoqing listened carefully and remembered every word he said in her heart. Since ancient times, actors' income had mostly depended on others' rewards. The method of buying tickets before watching the performance had never been heard of. But this was not important. What was important was that this sentence came from his mouth, so it must not be wrong. This method is not necessarily suitable. In short, change it slowly. You know the things here better than I do. You can make your own decisions. Unconsciously, the last piece of osmanthus cake had been eaten. Li Yi stood up, clapped his hands and said. Wan Ruoqing also stood up, bowed to him seriously and said, "If this method is feasible, I don't know how many people can avoid being homeless. I thank you on behalf of those actors. The matter of recruiting actors will be handed over to you and Mr. Sunday." Li Yi made an obeisance and said. The reason why he did this was that he also wanted to change the current situation of this industry and let those actors live a better life, but it was more because of his own selfishness. But in any case, a win-win result was always good. He was used to being a hands-off boss. After handing this matter to Wan Ruoqing, he didn't intend to take care of it anymore. She was also an actor, so she was the most suitable candidate for this matter. When he walked out of the brothel and passed by Rui Square, suddenly a figure rushed out from the side and grabbed his arm. "Lord Commandant, you're finally here." Li Yi was startled, thinking that it was someone from the Green Forest who had come to seek revenge. Just as he was about to struggle free, he heard the figure's surprised and delighted voice. From the looks of it, Xiaoqin was not here to seek revenge. Xiaoqin took a closer look and asked doubtfully, "Physician Qin, what are you doing?" The person in front of him was Physician Qin of Huichun Hall. After not seeing him for a long time, the old man who was previously quite spirited had actually become much more haggard. It was unknown what had happened during this period of time. He invited him into the Rui workshop and poured him a cup of green tea. After taking a sip, Dr. Qin sighed and said with a bitter tone, "County Lieutenant, you really made me look for you for a long time." "Why is Dr. Qin looking for me?" Li Yi looked at him in confusion. "Did I owe him money?" Looking at him, it seemed that he owed him a lot. "Impossible. I don't remember when I borrowed money from him." Looking at the county lieutenant's confused face, the expression on Dr. Chen's face could no longer be described in words. Since the last time he saw the county lieutenant suture the wound with a needle and thread, Dr. Chen knew that this was another great achievement. He solemnly asked him to spread this method. At that time the county lieutenant also readily agreed, but after that day there was no news. Although he personally saw the county lieutenant's rescue that day, he went to see the patient. The suture was obviously not an ordinary thread, and there seemed to be some details before the suture. He still had a lot of doubts in these aspects. It was a matter of great importance, so it was impossible for him to hastily present this method. As a doctor, Dr. Qin certainly knew the importance of this method. If all the doctors in the world could learn this method, many lives would be saved. In the days when he was waiting for the county lieutenant to teach this method, he didn't know the taste of food and couldn't sleep at night. If he could also leave a small mark on this great merit, what kind of honor would it be? However, after waiting for a few days, he didn't see the county lieutenant again. Dr. Chen couldn't sit still and went to the county government office to look for him several times, but he only got the answer that the county lieutenant was not in. He went to the Rui workshop to look for him, but the door of the shop was closed and there was a big lock hanging outside. He stayed outside for several days but no one came. One night he finally saw the light in the shop, but before he got close he was put on the neck by several knives at the same time. He was almost scared to death in the middle of the night. If he didn't explain his identity to those people, his head would have been cut off. Thinking of his experience these days, and then looking at the county lieutenant's confused expression at this time, it was obvious that he had forgotten about that matter. Dr. Qin almost spat out a mouthful of old blood. Forcibly suppressing his old blood pressure, Dr. Qin stood up and respectfully bowed to Li Yi, saying, "I beg you, Your Excellency, to spread the method of suturing wounds to the world. Countless people and soldiers will remember the county lieutenant's great kindness." After Dr. Qin spoke, Li Yi remembered this matter. At that time he seemed to have said that he would teach him the method of suturing wounds, but he didn't. At that time he was worried about those gangsters, so he didn't remember it later. If he hadn't suddenly mentioned it today, he probably wouldn't have remembered it for the rest of his life. They didn't need to remember his great kindness. Saving a life was better than building a 7-storied pagoda. Suturing wounds didn't require any technical content, but it could play a big role on the battlefield. If the doctors in the army could learn it, at least more than 20% of the soldiers could escape from the line of death. Gunpowder was like a devil locked in Pandora's box, a machine that harvested human lives in the cold weapon era. Li Yi was the person who released it. No one knew how many people would die in the hands of this devil in the future. Although he didn't do it himself, it could be regarded as an indirect sin. He didn't want to build an innumerable pagoda to become a Buddha, but it was good to reduce some of his sins. In order to ensure that he didn't miss any key information, Dr. Chen made full use of the truth that a good memory was inferior to a bad pen. He deliberately borrowed a pen and paper from Li Yi and wrote down all the words that Li Yi said next. After that, he also asked Li Yi to check it several times until there was no mistake. Looking at the dense page of paper, Dr. Chen finally showed a smile on his face. This piece of paper was as light as a feather, but it weighed more than 10,000 pounds in his heart. If the future generations could remember his name when they mentioned the suturing technique again, besides feeling grateful to County Magistrate Li, he wouldn't have any regrets even if he died now. County Magistrate I Chen Mufeng, dare not forget your kindness in this life. Dr. Chen's face was solemn, and he once again bowed respectfully to Li Yi. The bow just now was for the people in the world and this bow was for himself. In this world, everyone wanted to have a chance to leave their name in history and be remembered by the future generations. Dr. Chen was naturally no exception. County Magistrate Li, who gave him this opportunity, could accept his big bow. County Magistrate, if your relatives and friends need medicine for any diseases in the future, You can come to our Huichen Hall. We won't charge a penny for the medicine." In order to show his sincerity, Dr. Chen patted his chest and said. Li looked at him. Compared with Her Royal Highness who only exploited him and never gave him any benefits, Dr. Chen's sincerity was already very good. But why did he still have an urge to kick him? Chapter 262. Dr. Chen held the piece of paper and left as if he had found a treasure. Before he left, he told Li Yi that when he got back, he had to make a copy of what was written on it and personally hand it over to Sir Liu of the Imperial Physician's Bureau. As for the original manuscript, which was this piece of paper, he had to keep it at home and pray to it every day so that it could be passed down to future generations. It seemed that for the ancient people, money was not the most important thing. Even when they did not have enough to eat, clothes to wear, and food to eat, they still valued reputation and honor more than anything else. Scholars sharpened their brains to enter the court and become an official. Which one of them did not have ambitions to fulfill, to make a career, and to leave their name in the annals of history? Perhaps later on, they only thought about making money and wielding power, but that was a trend in a bad situation. One could not deny their original intentions. Dr. Chen put down his pride and asked him for advice on suturing wounds. He even traveled thousands of miles from Qing and Prefecture to the capital to personally hand this thing over to the hands of the imperial physician, Lu Jimin, so that all the doctors in the world could learn it. All this was just to leave a small mark in the annals of history. If someone in the future, when suturing a wound, had a 1 in a million chance of thinking of the name Chen Mufeng, he would probably laugh out loud in his coffin. His obsession was so deep that if Li Yi had said no at that time, Dr. Chen would probably have knocked his head on Li Yi's body to prove his sincerity. As he walked out of Rui's workshop, he sighed. Leaving a name in the annals of history was far more practical than a few hundred or 1,000 taels of silver. In the future, if he had a cold or diarrhea, he would not go to other medicine shops, but to Huichen Hall. Whatever he could get back was better. Li Yi held a sword in his hand and waved it in the courtyard. Every day he would take out 2 hours to practice martial arts in the courtyard. This had become his daily routine. The sword in his hand was Lu Rui's treasure. After much coaxing and pestering, he finally managed to borrow it from her. He also used 10 pieces of osmanthus cakes as a condition for her to teach him a set of swordsmanship. The osmanthus cake was given to him by Wan Ruoqing. He liked doing business without any cost the most. In 2 days he had almost mastered the basic sword art taught by Lu Rui. When he was fighting with Mississippi Lu, who only used a branch and did not use any true chi, his sword was knocked away after only 2 moves, and the branch was on his neck. The evaluation he received was that he only knew inflexible moves and did not know how to be flexible. Even if he learned a powerful sword art, it would be useless. Li Yi was also helpless about this. He didn't have much experience in fighting, and only Mississippi Lu was willing to spar with him. How much flexibility could he possibly have? He also knew where his shortcomings were. When it came to practicing martial arts, not everyone could dominate the world after learning a powerful martial art. Without enough accumulation of experience, it was like owning a treasure for nothing. The only thing missing was the key to open the door. It would be a waste not to use the free sparring partner. If he fought with Mississippi Lu more, he would become more and more powerful. Uncle Han walked over with a cloth bag in his hand and put it on the stone table. There was a rustling sound coming from the cloth bag. Uncle Han smiled and said, "Young master, the small wooden blocks are all done." "Thank you for your hard work, Uncle Han." Li Yi opened the cloth bag and saw piles of small wooden blocks inside. They already had the shape of mahjong, and the size was similar to the size of the mahjong in the future. The edges and corners were also polished very smooth so it would not hurt his hand. He counted the number and there were exactly 150 pieces. There were 136 pieces in a set of mahjong. In case one piece was broken there was a spare. Now that he had the wooden blocks, he would leave the rest to Mississippi Lu. Looking at Lu Rui who was practicing swordsmanship not far away, Li Yi carried the cloth bag and walked over. She was practicing the Tai Chi swordsmanship. Recently she seemed to have hit a bottleneck. She often raised her sword and slashed randomly. When there was nothing to do, Li Yi did not dare to talk to her. "Rui, how about we discuss something?" Seeing Li Yi walking over, Lu Rui put away the sword in his hand. He glanced at her and said impatiently, "What?" Her tone was a little irritated. These days her learning of the Tai Chi swordsmanship was smooth. 2 days ago she finally hit a bottleneck. Her progress was slow, as if she was stuck in a quagmire. "Help me carve something on these wooden blocks, and I will teach you the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship." Li looked at her and said temptingly, negotiation was also an art. First of all, one had to know what the other party needed. Then, they would be able to achieve miraculous results. Because of this matter, Mississippi Lu was like having her period for the second time in a month. Her temper was bad and even Xiao Huan was avoiding her. She could not resist the temptation and could only be a free labor in exchange for what she needed. You know the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship? Anger flashed across Lu Rui's face. She glared at him. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Because she had hit a bottleneck, she was thinking about how to break through even when she was eating and sleeping. Suddenly, someone told her that she knew the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship. Her first thought was not happiness but anger. This was Mississippi Lu's logic. Seeing that Mississippi Lu's gaze was starting to turn hostile, Li was a little puzzled. The story should not have developed like this. Shouldn't she agree to his request and carve mahjong in exchange for the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship that he talked nonsense about? Why was she looking at him like that? Wait, why did she raise her sword? What do you want? Wait, let's talk. Put down your sword first. Don't do it. Help. After a while, Li was forced to a corner by Lu Rui. Mississippi Lu probably did not know that her current position was called leaning against the wall in the future. She only looked at Li with a mocking gaze. Li felt that he was too naive just now. Women were unreasonable creatures. If this woman was called Lu Rui, then she could not be judged by common sense. The idea of using the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship that even he did not know whether it was real or fake had been proven to be impossible. Looking at Mississippi Lu's expression, she was ready to force herself on him. There was no rice at home, so Rui took Xiao Huan out to buy some. Uncle Han closed the door when he went out. There were only the two of them at home. Even if they screamed their throats out, no one would come to save them. For Taiji, the sword moves aren't important. Only by memorizing the constantly revolving sword intent and forgetting the order of the moves can one obtain its essence. When facing an enemy, one must control the sword with his will, allowing it to be ever-changing and have endless moves. Only by mastering it thoroughly can one be able to use it as one pleases. A man knows when to yield and when to stand tall. Facing Mississippi Lu's robbing behavior, Li decided to compromise for now. Although he did not really understand what this sentence meant, when Zhang Sanfeng taught Zhang Wuji swordsmanship on Wudong Mountain, he made him forget the moves. Perhaps this was what it meant. It should be able to scare Mississippi Lu, right? After interacting with Rui for so long, Li already knew that the more mysterious something was, the more it could scare her. As for whether or not she could learn anything from it, it would depend on her own comprehension. Sure enough, after hearing this sentence, Mississippi Lu finally let go of him. A familiar blank expression appeared on her pretty face. Li let out a sigh of relief. When it came to tricking people, ordinary people could not be compared to those Taoist priests and monks. Priest Zhang was really a god and he could not catch up to him. Chapter 263. Just when Li gave up on the idea of hiring Mississippi Lu for free and planned to do it himself, Lu Rui walked over with her sword in her arms. Tell me, what did you want from me? She looked at Li with her sword in her arms. The feeling of a storm just now disappeared without a trace, and she felt a sense of lightness. Nothing much. I just want you to help me carve something on this. Li pointed at the pile of small wooden blocks and said. A moment later, the long sword in Rui's hand was replaced by a sharp little dagger. Her movements were so fast that Li couldn't see it clearly. Rings or long strips quickly appeared on the small blocks. After they were carved, she threw them to Li. Li couldn't believe it. Mississippi Lu had changed so much before and after. Did her period leave for the second time this month in such a short time? Or did she really understand the essence of Tai Chi sword from those words and successfully break through the realm? After careful observation, he found that there seemed to be some small changes in her body. In the past, she was like a sharp sword that could scare people to death with just a glance. Now, that kind of temperament had weakened a lot, and there was an additional indescribable feeling. This feeling was more or less similar to the feeling that Rui gave him. Li sighed in his heart, feeling quite hurt. What kind of person was this? He just randomly made a few sentences, and she actually understood the essence of martial arts. Wasn't what she said just now nonsense in Wuxia novels? Could it be that old Master Jin, the master of Wuxia novels, was actually a peerless master who returned to the natural state? He probably wouldn't have the chance to verify the truth of this matter in this lifetime. He picked up the small wooden block that Lu Rui threw over and painted the patterns on it. The ink quickly seeped in and he put it under the sun to dry it in a short while. Winter really wasn't a good season. It was annoying to always be under the sun. Occasionally he could sit on the Kong and play mahjong to change his mood. There were 4 people in the house, just enough for a table. In a few days he would also make the poker cards. When Rui and Xiaohuan cooked, the 3 of them could also play dodiju. Thinking about it, it wasn't a bad idea. Old son, you're such a busy man. How come you have time to visit me today? In a dilapidated thatched cottage outside the prefecture city, an old man who was lying on a bed looked at the old man's surnamed son as he walked in and said with a smile, "I came to see if you're dead or not," old son said without hesitation. "Don't worry. I have to see if you're dead before I can close my eyes." They were old friends who often joked about such things. The old man lying on the bed with a somewhat dispirited complexion did not get angry. Instead, he retorted sarcastically. Old man's son placed a pile of things in a corner. Immediately, a young man came over with a porcelain bowl and respectfully said, "Grandpa son, drink some water. You've accepted a good disciple." Old man's son rubbed the young man's head and said with a smile. Knowing that his master and grandpa's son had something to say, the young man put down the bowl and left. Speaking of the young man in front of him, the old man lying on the bed relaxed his eyebrows. The old man on the bed looked at old man's son and said, "Let's get straight to the point. I don't have many years left to live. I heard that your farm has a steady stream of customers these days, and you've turned a dead farm into a farm. I admire your ability and I've never asked you for anything in my life. I just hope that after I die you can give this child something to eat. The child is still young and he can't live alone. As long as he doesn't starve to death, you can do whatever you want with him." "No, that won't do." Old son shook his head before he finished listening. A trace of anger appeared on the old man's face and he said, "Old son, this child's talent is not bad. If you train him for a few years he will be able to earn money for you. We've known each other for a lifetime, and you're not even willing to help me with this?" Old son shook his head and said, "Don't be in such a hurry to die. You should teach your disciple yourself. When I came here, I already sent little Yun to find a doctor. When the time comes, I'll ask the doctor to write a prescription and have your disciple boil it for you twice a day. I reckon that he will recover very quickly. When the time comes, I still need your help. This old man has so much talent, it would be a pity if he died." The old man on the bed listened with a blank face. Old son said a lot, but he became more and more confused. "If you have something to say, just say it. Stop your storytelling." The old man's muddy eyes stared at old son and said. Old son patted his shoulder and said with a smile, "Good thing, very good thing." The youth squatting outside the door used a wooden stick to tease the ants on the ground. There were not many ants in winter. Maybe it was because the weather was good today, but there were a few ants moving around under the eaves. The youth kept drawing circles with the wooden stick and watched the ants move back and forth in the circle. From time to time he would look back into the house. He didn't know what grandpa's son and master were talking about. Every once in a while there would be a few sounds of laughter. Grandpa's son seemed to be very happy and grandpa was also very happy. Why didn't little Yun come with grandpa's son today? She even said that she would go to the mountains with him to set a trap to catch rabbits in a few days. As the young man thought about this, he raised his head and saw a young man who looked about the same age as him walking over with another figure. 80,000. Li Yi sat cross-legged on the warm brick bed and took a tile from the small table. He rubbed it with his thumb for a while, but he couldn't figure out what it was. He took a peek, shook his head and threw the tile in his hand out. Looking at the messy tiles in front of him, his expression was quite gloomy. Lady Luck obviously didn't favor him today. After teaching Rui and the others how to play mahjong, he didn't win even once after a few rounds. He lost 5 taels of silver. 70,000. Rui's expression was even more gloomy than Li Yi's. She lost 10 taels of silver. Rui smiled and played a tile. This thing called mahjong that her husband made was quite fun. She had already won 5 taels of silver. 9 circles. Xiao Huan's eyes were curved into crescent moons. Second Mrs. 10 taels of silver were all won by her. When it was Li Yi's turn to play, he clearly felt his thigh being pinched by someone. He looked down and saw that Mississippi Lu was making a gesture to him. She stretched out 2 fingers on one hand and made a circle with her index finger and thumb on the other. This was what 2 circles meant. Li Yi glanced at her. Playing mahjong was all about fairness and she actually wanted to cheat. However, when he thought about it, if Mississippi Lu continued to lose, someone might suffer. For the sake of family harmony and world peace, he had no choice but to disassemble his tile and play at 2 circles. Rui couldn't wait to pick up Li Yi's tile. She was very satisfied with his tactfulness. With this 2 circles she could listen to the tiles. His little trick just now might not be able to fool her sister, but it was not a problem to trick Xiao Huan. The little maid was too lucky today. He had to suppress her arrogance first. Get rich. He casually played a tile. Whoosh. Xiao Huan stretched out her white and tender little hand and pushed down her tile wall. Her dimples were revealed as she smiled. 13 circles. Young master, miss, I won again. Chapter 264. Recently, Li Yi and Lu Rui had become closer because they had never won a game of mahjong with only the two of them in the house. Mahjong was originally created to relieve their boredom, but the more they played, the more depressed they became. It was not a big deal to lose money, but they had to regain their dignity. Mississippi Lu was more competitive than him, and she would not allow herself to lose to others in any aspect. So recently the game at home had not stopped. Then the two of them lost more and more. Li Yi finally understood what was going on in a gambler's mind. It was no wonder that so many people had lost everything because of gambling since ancient times. This was a road of no return. He thought he had the home advantage. Rui and the others had just started playing mahjong, and it would take them a long time to familiarize themselves with the game. However, the goddess of fortune only cared about Xiao Huan and Rui. He and Mississippi Lu had never received the goddess's blessing. It was indeed a must-kill weapon for middle-aged and elderly women. Within 2 days, a second set of mahjong appeared in the house. After dinner, the women who were idle at home played mahjong for the whole afternoon. Old Fong and the others were busy renovating the stoves for each family. After Mrs. Fong came to the kitchen to take a look, she no longer mentioned the matter of Old Fong smashing the stoves. She played mahjong with a few other women and estimated that they would be able to have dinner the next day. After cooking, the Kong was warm and comfortable. This glutton finally did something reliable. When Li Yi came back from outside, he saw a few women in front of the house from afar. The sounds of eating and banging were incessant. 2 elderly women shook their heads and sighed at the degeneration of morals in the world. How did the originally diligent wives suddenly become lazy women? The children waved their arms and cried out that they were hungry, but the mothers only cared about grabbing the wooden blocks. When the children cried out that they were hungry, the mothers threw a few copper coins to the children to buy food. In the past, such women would have been driven back to their parents' homes. Living in this world was not just for food and clothing, but also for entertainment. The emergence of mahjong had undoubtedly opened the door to a new world for the women in the stronghold. They had found spiritual sustenance. As for whether or not they would become addicted to it, they did not have to worry too much. It was just for the novelty of playing mahjong for a few days. After the novelty wore off, mahjong could only be reduced to an ornament in daily life. People who were used to living a hard life would not be idle all the time. For example, Old Man Sun had become busier and busier recently. Li Yi had just returned from the brothel. While Old Man Sun was not around, he and Ruoqing spent a long time talking about recruiting performers and expanding their business. A medium-sized brothel had been rebuilt outside the city. According to Li Yi, it was more appropriate to call it a theater. Building such a thing was different from building a house. It was the same as building a shack. The place that had been built in a few days was sturdy, far better than other crudely built brothels. It would definitely not collapse under the weight of heavy snow again. As for actors, since this model was still in the experimental stage, they had only recruited 20 of them for the time being. Li Yi and Wan Ruoqing had discussed it and decided that a medium-sized theater should have 20 actors. It would not only satisfy the performance requirements, but it would also be easier to manage. Living at the bottom of society, it was common for them to not have enough to eat. No one could refuse a fixed monthly salary of 500 copper coins. At first, those performers thought that Old Man Sun was lying to them. After a short moment of shock, they seemed to be afraid that Old Man Sun would change his mind, so they immediately pressed their fingerprints on the contract. In addition to the salary, the content of the contract also required them not to spread what they learned here. Everyone understood this. For people like them, this was something to eat. If others learned it, they would be the ones starving to death. No one dared to violate the contract. Even if this was brought to the government, it would count. It was definitely a place that they could not afford to offend. Stage plays were still very unfamiliar to those newly recruited performers. After listening to Li Yi's suggestion, Old Man Sun and the others pondered for a long time before they came up with it. These people had no experience, so they still needed to go through some training before they could officially take up the job. Although the painted skin was still popular, it was obviously not as popular as before. The next one to be put on the big stage would be a Chinese ghost story. Unlike the former, which relied on horror to attract people, Stories like romance and the female ghost scholar would probably be more attractive to men in this era. This was especially true for scholars. Every single one of them had fantasized about various romantic affairs, such as spending the spring night with a fox immortal or a beautiful female ghost. 80% of the supernatural novels on the market had such a plot, and it was still the mainstream of the market. It was a group of ancient losers who liked to fantasize. If their fantasies were fulfilled, they would not be afraid of not generously, "Oh right, I still have to find time to copy a few more stories. Why don't I take out the complete Liao Zhai novel and make it into a series?" Li lay comfortably in the huge bathtub. Actually, the ancient people also knew how to enjoy themselves. If the bathtub was covered with a lid, could it be called a sauna? In the middle of winter, there was nothing more comfortable than soaking in a warm room with a hot bath. If there was, then there would be a pair of soft hands constantly massaging your shoulders while you were soaking in the bath. The tiredness of the day would be dispelled. Xiao Huan's massage skills were becoming more and more skillful. Li Yi secretly condemned this kind of luxurious and decadent life in his heart. He was incomparably disgusted with feudal hedonism. He opened his eyes and glanced at the door through the mist. Xiao Huan had gone out to get hot water. Why wasn't she back yet? Creak. The door was pushed open and he could vaguely see a figure carrying a bucket of water in. Li Yi closed his eyes in satisfaction. Footsteps came from behind him. Warm water was poured into the bathtub. Just as the servant girl was about to leave, Li Yi called out to her without opening his eyes. "Wait a moment, help massage the young master's shoulders again." The footsteps paused and a moment later, a pair of soft hands were placed on his shoulders. He felt that Xiao Huan's skills this time had improved quite a bit. He remembered that when he was shopping previously, the servant girl stared at a bracelet in Golden Jade Lane for a long time. He would buy it for her tomorrow. As he massaged, Li Yi began to feel strange. No matter how fast the servant girl's skills in massaging the shoulders improved, it was impossible for her to reach Rui's level in less than a quarter of an hour. Moreover, the familiar chatter by his ear was gone, and there was no longer any pleading for him to continue telling her the story that she had not finished. Just when he was about to turn his head to take a look, a familiar voice sounded. "Husband, the water seems to be a little cold. Do you want to add some hot water?" This was Rui's voice. Chapter 265. Ordering Ru Yi around was not as easy as ordering Xiao Huan around. He did not add more hot water, nor did he let Rui continue to massage his shoulders. After she went out, he came out of the bathtub, dried his body, lay on the bed with his arms as a pillow, and stared at the ceiling in a daze. Before going to bed, he would habitually think about some things. Even the memory fragments hidden in the depths of his mind in his previous life were found in a corner, carefully savoring and never tired of it. One by one, the happy, sad, or angry things were like fleeting clouds. Although it had only been a few months, it seemed to have crossed thousands of years. Those things, whether happy or sad, did not cause much ripples in his heart. He just tried his best not to think of those familiar faces. Every time this happened, an emotion called yearning would spread like crazy. Those people or things he was destined to be unable to give up in this life. If there was a chance to go back, no matter how difficult it was, he would not have any hesitation, even if it was just a glance and then look at that familiar world. Pa! A crisp sound rang in the room, but Li Yi, who was in a state of absent-mindedness, did not notice it. Today was the 15th and the moon outside was very round. This day of every month was the most difficult time for Li Yi, especially when he was alone. There was no sound around, and a feeling of loneliness escaped from the depths of his soul. However, even in a state of absent-mindedness, the feeling of dizziness could still be felt, and the strength in his body was gradually draining away. The feeling of nausea also gradually became clearer. Naturally, it was impossible for him to feel dizzy and nauseous because of homesickness. When he realized that the situation was not quite right, he immediately recovered his mind and sat up from the bed. At this time, the room was filled with a strange smell. Li Yi was very familiar with this smell, the smell of coal smoke that he often smelled when he was a child. Not knowing when, the chimney made of bamboo on the honeycomb briquette stove actually cracked. The symptoms that he felt just now were obviously mild carbon monoxide poisoning. The chimney made of bamboo couldn't completely expel the smoke, so people who had a stove would usually choose to extinguish the stove at night. After taking a bath just now, he forgot to do so. Fortunately, he didn't fall asleep. Otherwise, Ru Yi and the others would have to wait to collect his corpse tomorrow morning. With a lingering fear in his heart, he moved the stove outside and opened the door and windows to the fullest. He sat alone on the porch and looked at the moon. She did not know when the carbon monoxide in the room would run out. The moon tonight was big and round. It was said that the moon on the 15th of the lunar month was round on the 16th of the lunar month, but the round in the word circumference was not the round in the word reunion. Wearing an unlined garment, it was quite cold sitting on the porch. However, Li did not want to move now, so he did not go back to the room to get his clothes. He just leaned against a pillar and looked up at the sky. He did not know whether the moon in the two worlds was the same, at least on the surface. There was no difference. There was a large dark spot alternating between light and dark. Now, the common saying was that the moonlight was blocked by the osmanthus tree in the moon palace, and almost everyone thought so. Every time this happened, he would involuntarily have a feeling of loneliness as a master. A group of ignorant people. It was just a plane on the moon. There was no osmanthus tree. Last time, when Li Xian was drunk, he said he wanted to go to the moon to see Chang'e. With the current conditions, he could not think about going to the moon, which was even more difficult than reaching the sky. A figure had been leaning against the door for a long time, watching Li Yi's expression alternating between joy and sadness. His eyes had never left the moon in the sky, and he was holding a garment in his hand, but he never walked over. Achoo! He sneezed and almost snot came out of his nose. When he was about to get up and go to the room to get his clothes, he felt a weight on his shoulder, and a coat immediately appeared on his body. "Husband, are you admiring the moon alone?" Lu Rui sat down beside Li Yi, also staring at the moon in the sky. "I'm thinking, when can I go to the moon to have a look?" Li Yi seemed to murmur unconsciously. "Ah." There was a little surprise in Rui's voice. She looked back at him, blinking her eyes. She had always been steady, but at this moment she actually looked like a little girl. She reached out and touched Li Yi's forehead. After finding that he did not have a fever, she became even more confused. The Moon Palace was the place where immortals lived. How could mortals go up there? Since ancient times, countless people had thought about it, but no one had done it. Although the moon always hung there quietly, there was no door. Only immortals could go up there. Don't be surprised. In theory, this is very feasible. Li Yi took her hand away from his forehead and found that it was very cold. He held it with both hands and said, "Maybe thousands of years later, someone will really do it. However, if an ordinary person goes up there, they will definitely die. It's hot in the day and cold at night. There are holes made by big stones everywhere. It's not a place for people to stay at all. If they don't die from the cold or the heat, it will be fun. If they don't die from the cold or heat, then it'll be fun. Everyone there is an expert in Qigong. With a leap, they can cover at least a distance of several feet. Their strength is also extremely great. An ordinary person can lift the stone lion at the entrance with just a little effort." Lu Rui let Li Yi hold her hand and transfer his warmth to her. She listened to him talk about these incredible things and would occasionally ask a few questions. He was always so knowledgeable. He knew a lot of things that she had never heard before. In the past, she thought that people who were educated were all so amazing. Later, she gradually realized that her husband was different from those scholars. No scholar could tell so many wonderful stories, and no scholar knew so many ways to earn money. Furthermore, no scholar knew that Chang'e was not on the moon. Her husband even knew how far the moon was from here. If there was a road that could go straight to the moon, an ordinary person would have to walk for 10 years to get there. If it was someone else, they would definitely think that the person who said these things was crazy. However, she knew that her husband never lied about these things. Achoo! He couldn't continue gossiping about the moon with Rui. Li Yi had already sneezed a few times. It was winter and it was still cold to sit outside with clothes on. His butt was almost frozen to the point of losing consciousness when he sat on the cold ground. Seeing Li Yi stand up, Lu Rui walked into his room and quickly came out. She shook her head and said, "I can't go in yet. The carbon poison has not dissipated completely." When she went to Li Yi's room to get his clothes, she already felt that something was wrong. Seeing him put the stove outside, how could she not know what had happened? "Forget it. I'll sleep in the kitchen tonight." It was really too cold. Li Yi really missed the hot Kong bed. Lu Rui shook her head and said, "Xiao Huan is afraid of the cold. I've already let her sleep in the kitchen. I'm afraid she's already asleep." Li Yi wrapped his clothes around his body. Originally he had one room, Rui had another, and Xiao Huan usually slept with Rui. Now that he couldn't sleep in his room at night, and Xiao Huan had taken over the warm Kong bed in the kitchen, did he have to sleep outside tonight? "Why don't you sleep in this concubine's room tonight?" Hearing Rui's voice, Li Yi's expression froze. Chapter 266. Why don't you sleep in this concubine's room tonight? Hearing Rui's words, Li Yi's first thought was that it was her trick again. Last time she closed the door and asked him to take off his clothes, but he didn't expect it to be for healing. This time it must not be what he thought at first. Although he had the soul of thousands of years later and was much more open-minded than the ancient people, in fact he was still very thin-skinned on some things. After all, he was just a young man without any experience in love in his previous life. It was too difficult to expect him to be an expert in flirting with girls, especially beautiful girls in ancient times. He walked into Rui's room generously. He would sleep here for the night. Rui Xiaohuan or Rui could make do for one night. In the future he would have to put out the stove early at night and Fang would have to warn him. Carbon monoxide poisoning was almost incurable in ancient times. Even if he could be cured after a long time, there would be serious sequelae. He would either be paralyzed or stupid, and he needed to be vigilant at all times. There was a faint fragrance on the sheets and quilt, which Li Yi would never forget in his life. When he first came to Willow Leaf Village, he woke up in this fragrance. It was not perfume but the natural body fragrance of a woman. Rui carried a quilt from the next room and closed the door. Under Li Yi's puzzled gaze she walked to the bed and said, "Husband, can you move a little deeper?" Carbon monoxide poisoning and Fang were all forgotten by Li Yi at the moment. If she liked to inhale, she could inhale. She had a good body, so inhaling some carbon monoxide was nothing. Hugging the quilt with a faint fragrance, he shrank to the foot of the bed. Watching Rui crawling into the quilt and lying next to him, Li Yi was still in a daze. It turned out that he was right this time. Xiaohuan and Rui are asleep and I don't want to disturb them. She turned to look at Li Yi and explained, "It's getting late. Husband, you should rest early." If Li Yi had not fallen into a state of shock, he would have been able to hear the slight tremble in her voice. Unfortunately, he was still unable to get over the soft flesh on his arm. He pinched it hard and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The pain meant that he wasn't dreaming, nor was it a hallucination caused by inhaling too much carbon monoxide. In the middle of the room, the flame of the oil lamp on the table was still flickering. Rui flicked her finger and a strong wind swept across, plunging the room into darkness. Although he was only covered with a blanket, Li did not feel cold at all. Instead, his body felt warm from the inside out. His nose was filled with a familiar fragrance. He had always been used to sleeping alone. Now that there was another person by his side, the sleepiness that had just arisen was instantly gone. However, none of this was important. His heartbeat quickened and his mind was filled with all kinds of guesses. What did she mean? Was it what he thought? If he pounced on her now, would he be beaten to death by her? The good tacit understanding between the two was finally broken tonight. Li Yi, who was almost an idiot when it came to relationships, couldn't guess what she was thinking. There was a fierce battle in his heart. Should he be a beast or worse than a beast? This was a question worth thinking about. Li Yi felt that he was starting to be like a philosopher again. In the darkness, where Li Yi couldn't see, Lu Rui's pretty face blushed from her neck to her ears. She could hear that Li Yi's heartbeat was much faster than before. In fact, as a martial arts master, she couldn't control her heartbeat at this moment. It wasn't easy to make this decision. She pondered for a long time before she plucked up the courage to say it. Husband and wife, they had to sleep together eventually. Although they weren't used to it now, there would be a day when they would get used to it. Aunt Fang had already asked several times why there was no movement in her stomach after being married for almost half a year. She asked if she should find a doctor to take a look. She was already so old that her child could run around. Listening to Aunt Fang's private words with a red face, she still blushed when she thought about it. When she thought about those things she would do with her husband in the future, she could no longer maintain her calm state of mind. Although she was very skilled in martial arts, she was still a woman from an ordinary family. She had practiced martial arts hard since she was young. It was only because after she became stronger that no one could bully the two of them. Now she didn't have to worry about being bullied. She had also reached a level that others couldn't reach in their lifetime in martial arts. Instead, she liked such a peaceful life. In her heart, she also hoped to be able to live like a normal husband and wife as soon as possible. The prerequisite was to break the silent tacit understanding between the two of them. No matter what, someone had to take the first step. If that person wasn't her husband, then it could only be herself. She stretched her hands out of the quilt and folded them in front of her chest. Her eyes were wide open. She felt an extra breath beside her. It was already very late at night, but she still didn't feel sleepy at all. When a hand reached out from the side, her heart couldn't help but start to beat wildly. She almost ran away, but in the end that hand only held her hand and didn't move further. Even Li Yi could feel that Rui's breathing had become hurried, which meant that her heart was not calm at this time. After feeling her mood, his heart calmed down. Sleep. Their fingers were tightly interlocked. Li closed his eyes and quickly entered a dream. The breathing beside him quickly calmed down, and Lu Rui let out a long sigh of relief. She tilted her head slightly to take a look, and an imperceptible smile appeared on her pretty face. She slowly closed her eyes. Li Yi had another dream at night. This time there were no messy things in the dream. Naturally, he didn't have to wash his underwear secretly in the morning. In the dream he was in his home in the 21st century, sitting on the sofa and watching TV. Rui, who was wearing a white dress, was busy in the kitchen. The doorbell rang. Li got up and opened the door. When he opened the door, a long sword was on his neck. Opposite him was Mississippi Lu, who was dressed up and glaring at him. At the end of the dream, he was still being chased by Mississippi Lu with a sword. Li didn't understand why Rui always liked to run into his dream. This time the reason for the chase was that he kidnapped her sister. Early in the morning he got up from the bed. Although there was no one beside him, the fragrance was still there, which meant that everything last night was not a dream. Last night he had crossed a huge chasm. There was a relaxed smile on the corner of his mouth. The carbon poison was really too annoying. Li felt that his previous room couldn't be used anymore. Coincidentally, there was not enough space in the storage room at home. From now on he would use it as a storage room. As for the original storage room, it was not bad to modify it into a study. Xiao Huan walked out of Li Yi's room with a copper basin in her hand. She looked puzzled. When she was about to ask Miss where the son-in-law went early in the morning, she walked to the door of Miss's room and looked inside. The copper basin in her hand fell to the ground with a clang. Chapter 267. I'm sorry I won. Rui played a tile. Li smiled and pushed down his tile wall. Rui jumped off the heated bed in annoyance. She glared at the two and said, "You two are in cahoots. I'm not playing anymore." Ever since Rui became Li Yi's mistress, Li Yi's luck came back. He kept gesturing secretly and Rui always understood his meaning. Thus, Mississippi Lu became the only one who lost money in the family. Although winning money was not the main point in the end. At most, she used a few copper coins to deal with it. However, there were wins and losses in playing mahjong. It was not a good thing to always lose. Mississippi Lu was obviously angry. She was probably going to take her sword to the courtyard to chop the air. If there was a god of mahjong, Xiao Huan must be her biological daughter. It was just that recently she was obviously absent-minded. She was not focused when playing mahjong. No one knew what she was thinking. The next day, Li Yi changed his room into a storage room. The reason was that the room that had been ravaged by carbon poison could not be lived in. He began to live together with Xiao Huan with a peace of mind. Although he had to choose between being a beast and being worse than a beast, he had no choice but to choose the latter. But compared to the past, this was already a groundbreaking event. The reason why Xiao Huan was a little unhappy might be that she could no longer hug Rui to sleep. She had to sleep on the heated bed in the kitchen for a long time. But it did not matter. When spring came, he would build her another room. It was not a good idea for a girl to always sleep in the kitchen. Of course, the position that should have belonged to her was occupied by him. The little servant girl felt wronged first. He would slowly make it up to her later. He took Xiao Huan to buy the hairpin that she had liked for a long time. She would no longer have a depressed expression on her face. The two people walking in front were chatting. They were talking about the new play in the Chongping Street Theater. It was called A Chinese Ghost Story. The former brothel was no longer called a brothel. It was called a theater. Although most people were not used to it, the name was not the point. The point was that the plays performed in it were more novel and special. It was not comparable to any straw shed in the courtyard. He hoped that this A Chinese Ghost Story would be better than the previous Painted Skin. Of course, special places always had special rules. It was said that the theater was different from ordinary brothels. Not everyone could enter just because they wanted to. They had to buy a so-called ticket at the door. Although it was called a ticket, it was actually a small wooden plaque. On it was written the plays that could be watched with the wooden plaque, as well as the amount of time that could be spent inside. When they left, they had to return the wooden plaque. The tickets weren't expensive, only a few copper coins were enough. It wasn't even as much as the tips they threw out at once. Someone cursed inwardly. Those actors were crazy for money. Had they never seen a brothel that took the initiative to accept money? You want money, right? I won't look anymore, okay? Many people were very satisfied with this. They felt that the idea of the theater was really wonderful. The appearance of the tickets was to keep those who had no money outside. The last time they went to watch a play, there were actually beggars sitting next to them. They were dirty and smelly. There was only so much space in the theater. If they were late, there wouldn't even be a place to stand. Now it was better. Those who only wanted to join in the fun and were unwilling to pay for tips could not enter. They were happy to be at peace. They sat leisurely with a pot of tea and a stack of broad beans. After watching the plays they liked, they would leave. It was extremely comfortable. Of course, when a new play was released, they had to be more agile. Who would care about a few copper coins for the people who lived in the prefectural city? If they were late, they could only stand. Thank you, son-in-law. With a newly bought hairpin in her hair, Xiao Huan's eyes turned into crescent moons again. In one hand she held a tanghulu. It was a gift from Aunt Sue when she met her on the street. In the other hand she held on to Li Yi's arm. She took a bite and leaned over to give a bite to Li Yi. She took a bite. The tanghulu in the winter didn't melt so easily. The taste was improved. Those women had been trying to make more delicious tanghulu. Now they had developed several different styles. After eating the tanghulu, the young maidservant looked up at Li Yi and said expectantly, "Son-in-law, let's go to the theater to watch a play, okay?" Just now, she heard the two people in front of her talk about a Chinese ghost of Qiannu. The son-in-law had told her this story. After hearing so many ghost stories, she was no longer afraid. The last time the son-in-law brought her to see the Painted Skin stage play, she only screamed when the ferocious-looking female ghost came out. The son-in-law said that a Chinese ghost of Qiannu was not that scary, so the young maidservant felt that it was okay for her to go and take a look. He did not reject Xiao Huan's request. Today he had brought her out for a stroll. She grew up in the village and did not come into contact with many people. The young maidservant maintained her innocent and lively temperament very well. With her chattering by her side, any worries would be swept away. A small room was built at the entrance of the brothel. It was only big enough for one person. A dozen people lined up and passed by the small room. After placing a few copper coins inside, a wooden plate would be handed out from the inside. As one of the major shareholders of the theater, of course, Li Yi did not need to buy a ticket. He held Xiao Huan's hand and walked directly through the entrance. The people in the line originally wanted to question him, but when they saw the young man at the entrance politely salute the young man, they swallowed their words and obediently lined up to buy the ticket. After walking through the entrance, they faced the stage directly. The expanded stage was more than twice the size of the previous one. The seats below were also increased. There were separate stalls on both sides. Spending a few copper coins, one could buy a plate of broad beans and a pot of tea. There were 3 flavors of broad beans and one could choose freely. Of course, other than broad beans, there were also many pastries. When watching a play, eating some snacks and drinking a cup of tea would immediately improve one's taste by a lot compared to those who only knew how to shout. The price of the seats in the theater was not the same. The closer one was to the stage, the clearer one could see, and the higher the price. Therefore, most of the time there would be empty seats in the first row. Some people would feel that there was not much difference between the front and back. It was really not worth it to spend a few copper coins for a seat in the front. The curtain on the stage had not been opened yet. One could see many figures behind the curtain. They were probably still making preparations. People were still lining up to enter the theater. There were not many people in the seats. He pulled Xiao Huan to sit in the middle of the first row and waited patiently. He glanced at the wooden plate in the hands of the person beside him. On it were the words "Painted Skin," indicating that the next performance was still Painted Skin. Senior Pu Songling was indeed a master of his generation. There was a performance of Painted Skin here, indicating that this play was quite popular. He turned his head and looked around. He realized that from the previous brothel to the current theater, too much had changed in just a few days. Chapter 268. The theater worker banged a gong, indicating that the performance was about to begin. At this time the theater was almost full. In the past, there had only been a few square tables in the brothel for people to sit around casually. Now it had been changed to chairs connected together. A small platform protruded from one side of the chairs for tea and food. Of course, only the first 2 rows had this kind of treatment. They had to let those people know where the extra copper coins they spent went. Xiao Huan wanted to see a Chinese ghost story, but she didn't make it. She could only watch The Painted Skin again. Since she had nothing to do, she might as well wait with her. When the curtains were pulled back, a few more figures sat next to Xiao Huan. Li Yi only glanced at them casually. He had just turned his head when he turned back. His expression was slightly dazed. Sitting next to Xiao Huan was a man about 40 years old. His appearance was not unfamiliar to Li Yi. Professor Feng as Magistrate Dong's god-level lackey. Usually, wherever he was, Magistrate Dong would appear unless something unexpected happened. Li looked over and saw the magistrate sitting next to him. He felt strange. Did the magistrate and the prefectural school professor have nothing to do all day? This was not a place high officials and nobles would come. One of them was in charge of the affairs of the prefecture, and the other was in charge of education. Logically speaking, they should be very busy. Why did they have the time to come here to watch a show? Clearly, Professor Feng also saw Li. After a pause, he turned his head and whispered a few words in Magistrate Dong's ear. Magistrate Dong had a deep impression of Li Yi. His few poems had surpassed all the students in Qing and Fu. He had a close relationship with Crown Prince Ning and Princess Yongle. However, his personality was a bit strange. He was extremely talented but didn't want to be an official. It was said that he had been made a county officer by the emperor, but he almost never went to the county yamen. The strange thing was, the security of the prefectural city was better than before. In all honesty, Magistrate Dong admired Li Yi very much. Especially that poem, wanting to speak but not wanting to speak, yet saying that the sky is cold in autumn, won him a deep liking. But he clearly had deep connections with the royal family. Although he wanted to promote him, it was not appropriate for him to do so. She had already forgotten about him, but she didn't expect to bump into him here today. Magistrate Dong shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. Today he just wanted to see the famous painted skin. He turned his head and said to another man in embroidered robes, "I'm curious what's so special about this painted skin that Brother Yen praised it so much." The man in embroidered clothes smiled and said, "I didn't expect that there would be no lack of capable people in this small brothel. Hidden in these short and strange stories is a profound truth. Under Brother Dong's rule, there are indeed many capable people. Before I left, His Majesty had already decided to implement the disciple rules in our Jing Kingdom as a book for children to learn. Brother Dong's contribution to the education of our Jing Kingdom cannot go unnoticed." Accepting the compliment of the man in embroidered clothes calmly, Magistrate Dong couldn't help but turn his head and look at the young man 2 seats away from him. Li Yi didn't want to flirt with a man, not to mention the other was the magistrate, even if it was the emperor. He didn't even think about immediately going up to greet the magistrate. These important people like to go out incognito. If he put on an appearance of greeting a superior, the magistrate might even blame him for ruining his low profile. Wan Ruoqing ran the brothel very well. There was no other brothel in the city that was cleaner, tidier, and more orderly than this one. Every performance would be slightly improved. The performers relied on their acting skills, not their bodies. They were completely incomparable to those coquettish prostitutes outside. If this place couldn't keep customers, where else could? Inspired by himself, Oldman's son was ready to open a special martial arts show, but he was still in the stage of collecting information. After the incident with the Bixia swordplay, Oldman's son keenly discovered the business opportunity. In the brothel outside the city, such stories seemed to be more popular. Moreover, the martial arts people were generous and would never be short of money. Sometimes they would even throw large silver ingots on the stage. Oldman's son had to seize this opportunity. They gave him a good suggestion. He could collect some strange stories in the martial arts world and ask around. Using the information he collected, he could rank the martial arts masters and revise the rankings according to the latest information. He heard that there was a man named Officer Zhao in Chuzhou City. Although he had always been known for his loyalty, he was actually a rare martial arts master. It was said that he was about to step into the Grandmaster realm. Ordinary people didn't even know this secret. Li Yi didn't pay attention to the performance on the stage. He was lost in his thoughts. If such a theater could be opened all over the Jing Kingdom, it would be a powerful force. Moreover, such a force would not easily attract the attention of others. If he could live such a peaceful life, he would consider it as contributing to the entertainment industry of this world. If there were always people who wanted to step on him, he was afraid that their feet would be pierced by nails. Stupid people, they think of ghosts as beauties. They don't listen to the words of loyalty. They are greedy for beauty. They don't know that a wife who has gone through hardships will gladly swallow the saliva of others. I don't know how many stupid people in the world don't know how to wake up. How sad. When thinking, the most annoying thing was to be interrupted, especially when the man in the brocade robe suddenly stood up and said these words with a laugh. To be able to see such emotions from watching a play, this fellow must have been educated before, and he must have been tormented by the path of sages. Even Li Yi was not satisfied, let alone the other people in the theater. Just when they were enjoying the show, someone suddenly stood up and shouted, Especially when the guy was sitting in the front row, everyone's view was blocked. What are you shouting for? Hurry up and sit down. They were all commoners. How could they know that the person sitting next to the man was the prefectural magistrate? They only knew that this guy had disturbed their interest in watching the show. Perhaps some people were frightened by his sudden shout, so they all spoke up in dissatisfaction. Magistrate Dong smiled bitterly. After so many years, his good friend still hadn't changed his bad habit. Thump. Among the noise there was a dull sound that was especially clear. A young man who looked like a scholar, who was sitting behind the man in the brocade robe, knelt in front of the man in the brocade robe. After bowing respectfully, he stood up and said, "Thank you for your teachings, sir. My poor wife who has gone through hardships with me for more than 10 years has suffered. Now, for the sake of a fox outside, I actually want to divorce her. How am I different from Wang Sheng?" Sir's words just now were like thunder in my ears. They were deafening. I will remember them for the rest of my life and never dare to forget them. After the scholarly young man finished speaking, he once again bowed to the man in the brocade robe and strode away without looking back. Li Yi stared blankly at the young man's back as he walked away. He was very confused. Where did they find this actor? It's not too late to mend one's ways. The man in the brocade robe also watched the young man leave with a smile on his face. He stroked his beard, displaying the demeanor of an expert. "I'm talking to you, sit down." If it wasn't for a shoe flying from behind and accurately hitting his face, he might have been able to maintain the demeanor of an expert for a while longer. Chapter 269. Magistrate Dong was shocked to see a large shoe print appear on the face of his good friend from the capital. Official Yen. Professor Feng's little heart couldn't help but beat wildly. How dare they throw a shoe at an official from the capital? These unruly people were simply too lawless. How dare you? Who threw the shoe? A few people around the man in embroidered robes had already stood up and turned to glare at the crowd. What did he say? Is he in the right to disturb the show? Chase them out. The guards of the man in embroidered robes were angry, but the audience was even angrier. It was already kind of them not to be thrown out for making a racket in the theater, but they dared to yell at everyone. They couldn't even watch the show. Weren't the few copper coins spent in vain? In the next moment, the guards were drowned in shoes flying from behind. People had thrown out quite a few people like this who didn't know what was good for them. Every show there would be one or two unlucky ones. This had even become a tradition in the theater. The smelly shoes flew through the air. Magistrate Dong and the other two were also affected. Of course they couldn't stay here any longer. They ran outside pathetically and finally let out a sigh of relief. A group of unruly people, this is too much. Professor Feng's face was hit by the sole of a shoe. His face was red and he stomped his feet outside. The man in embroidered robes used his sleeve to wipe his face. He wasn't angry. He shook his head and said, "This is a quiet place to watch the show. It is our fault for making a racket and disturbing others. It is not wrong of us to be thrown out." He turned his head to look at Magistrate Dong and said with a smile, "Under Brother Dong's rule, the people are very tough. Compared to the sorry state of Professor Feng and the man in embroidered robes, Professor Dong looked much better. The shoe had not been thrown on him and his clothes were very clean." He patted his robes and said, "The one who made a racket was you. Of course it is not wrong of you to be thrown out. We are the ones who have suffered an undeserved disaster." No matter. The man in embroidered robes waved his hand and said, "My words just now have caused Brother Dong's students to repent. Brother Dong, shouldn't you treat me to a banquet to express your gratitude?" "Oh right, Professor Feng, where is the best restaurant in Qing'an Prefecture? With my meager salary, I can't afford to go to the Drunken Fragrance restaurant." Magistrate Dong smiled and said, "There is a cup of green tea. It is a bit shabby but it is enough to serve guests. I haven't seen you for a few years, but your stinginess hasn't changed at all, Dong Wenyan." The man in embroidered robes shook his head and sighed. When Li Yi walked out, Magistrate Dong and the others were still standing outside. Xiao Huan wanted to watch the next scene of a Chinese ghost story. She asked a performer to take care of her and walked out alone. Prefectural Magistrate Dong was a boss-level official in Qing'an Fu. Since he had met him as the county magistrate, he naturally had to come up and greet him. The current Li Yi no longer considered the position of county lieutenant to be a troublesome matter. A minor rank 8 official position could eliminate most of the troubles in life. The naive thoughts of the past were long gone. This lowly official greets prefectural magistrate. He slowly walked in front of prefectural magistrate Dong and cupped his hands in salute. Li Yi had a good impression of Prefectural Magistrate Dong. This Prefectural Magistrate had a good reputation. Last time in the Wangfu he had even helped him out of trouble. Prefectural Magistrate Dong looked at him and asked, "County Magistrate Li is not on duty in the Yamen. Why are you here?" Li Yi coughed lightly and said, "A few days ago I was injured by a scoundrel. After applying for leave I have been recuperating at home." Prefectural Magistrate Dong was just asking casually. Although he wasn't in the Yamen, the security in the prefectural city was better than before. As the prefectural magistrate, he had specially studied the interrogation methods of the Anshi Yamen's bailiffs and bailiffs, as well as the division of districts. He planned to have the other counties follow suit in a few days. Professor Feng examined Li Yi from the side. He was surprised. After not seeing him for so many days, this rude young man seemed to have changed into a different person. He had become so humble. He wasn't used to it. The new year is approaching. We need more people to maintain the security in the city. As the county magistrate I am responsible. If you are feeling well, you should return to the Yamen as soon as possible. Prefectural Magistrate Dong nodded and suddenly said, "If I remember correctly, the Rui workshop is not far from here. I'm also tired from walking. Why don't we go to your place to rest for a while and have a cup of tea? What do you think, County Magistrate Li?" Li Yi was stunned. Didn't he just rest for a long time in the theater? Sure enough, the higher the official, the more pretentious. It was not a wise thing to refuse the prefectural magistrate. Li Yi nodded and said, "Milord, please." The Rui workshop was next to the brothel. Although the family no longer lived there, Xiao Huan would still go there to clean it every few days. The room was clean and tidy. It was just enough to rest, but there was no tea. After inviting them to sit down, Li Yi went to the theater to get 2 pots of tea. Prefectural Magistrate Dong had already sat down. When he turned around he found that the man in the brocade robe didn't follow him in. He stood at the door, raised his head and muttered something. "The strokes are elegant and graceful, the strokes are tactful and subtle, like moving clouds and flowing water. Good calligraphy, good calligraphy." Just as Dong Wenyun walked out, he heard the man in the brocade robe looking at the plaque above the shop and couldn't help praising it. He thought to himself that he had actually forgotten that the other party was obsessed with calligraphy and had collected many precious paintings at home. Furthermore, he himself was quite accomplished in calligraphy and painting, so it was normal for him to be attracted to the words on the plaque. Seeing him walk out, the man in the brocade robe looked at Prefectural Magistrate Dong and said, "Wenyun, do you know which master wrote these 3 words? I want to pay a visit. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you to arrange it." "There is no need to arrange it. The master is right there. If you have any questions, go ask him yourself." Prefectural Magistrate Dong pointed in a direction with a strange expression and said. The man in the brocade robe turned around and saw the young man just now walking over with 2 pots of tea. The man in the brocade robe looked back at Prefectural Magistrate Dong with an expression of disbelief. If these 3 words were written by that young man, I will eat this plaque." The man in the brocade robe didn't believe a single word of what Dong Wenyun said just now. These 3 words were written with strong and experienced strokes. It was impossible to write without decades of practice. Moreover, this was done by someone who was extremely accomplished in calligraphy. If it was an ordinary person, they might not be able to do it even after hundreds of years. This young man was at most in his early 20s. How could he have such a level of skill? It was precisely because he was proficient in calligraphy that the man in the brocade robe was so confident. If he didn't know that the young man was called the #1 talent of the Jing Kingdom by the Governor of Education, who was excellent in both poetry and calligraphy, and was able to write a legendary work like Rules for Disciples, Prefectural Magistrate Dong naturally wouldn't believe it either. If County Magistrate Li came back a little later, your plaque would be gone. Li Yi, who walked over, looked at Prefectural Magistrate Dong with a confused expression. He didn't know what to say. Chapter 270. In the Rui Square, Magistrate Dong sat on a chair and leisurely sipped tea. The man in embroidered robes walked around the shop, his gaze never leaving the calligraphy on the wall. A few guards stood at the door and occasionally glanced at the young man in the room. Their eyes were full of surprise. Professor Feng was not too surprised. Although this Li Yi's personality was mischievous, his talent was real. No one could deny this. Official Yan's plaque was for sure this time. As the man in embroidered robes walked around, he couldn't help but click his tongue in surprise. These paintings were strange and unconventional. He had never seen such a painting technique in his life. However, what shocked him was the various poems inscribed on the paintings. Good calligraphy. The person who inscribed these poems was definitely a master in calligraphy. If it wasn't for the fact that he was very familiar with the calligraphy of the few famous calligraphy masters in the Jing Kingdom, he would certainly have thought that the other person was one of them. Young man, did these paintings really come from your hands? The man in embroidered robes still couldn't believe that the master he had wanted to meet was actually such a young man. He looked at Li Yi and asked. Li Yi raised his hands in a salute and said, I had nothing better to do, so I casually wrote and drew. Please excuse me, sir. Magistrate Dong had already introduced him earlier. The person in front of him was a high-ranking official from the capital. Although he didn't know his position, he was certainly much more important than a small county officer like him. He couldn't be lacking in the necessary etiquette. I had nothing better to do, so I casually wrote and drew. A rare blush appeared on the man in embroidered robes' face. He had studied this field for more than 20 years, but he couldn't even compare to a young man who casually wrote and drew, in front of an old friend. This old face was a bit embarrassing. Originally he had thought that if there really was an unknown master hiding in Qing and Fu, he would definitely not miss this opportunity. He would prepare gifts, pay a visit and receive some guidance. Perhaps then he would break through the difficult situation that he had been stuck in for a few years. However, the master had been changed to a young person, so naturally, it wasn't so easy to ask for guidance. Seeing the conflicted expression on his face, Prefectural Magistrate Dong found it funny and said, If I remember correctly, Brother Yin just said that if the words on the signboard were truly written by County Lieutenant Li, I should eat it. I wonder if Assistant Minister Yan's words still count? Of course it counts. The man in embroidered robes snorted coldly and said, My words have always carried enormous weight. When have I ever gone back on my word? Gujiang, take down that signboard. We'll use it to accompany the wine when we get back. He strode to the door and ordered a guard. The guard didn't hesitate either. He leaped up and tapped twice on the wall. His entire body climbed onto the signboard, and he quickly removed the signboard with the words Rui Square written on it. He held the signboard firmly as he jumped to the ground. The action of tearing down the plaque was done in one go, natural and smooth. It was obvious that this was not the first time he had done this. This scene made Professor Feng's jaw drop. Magistrate Dong helplessly rubbed the space between his brows. Based on his personality, he should have known. When he was in the capital, he didn't know how many plaques had been taken down by him. It was to the extent that people who had hired a master to inscribe their inscriptions would take down their plaques and hide them at night to prevent them from being stolen at night. He probably had his eyes on this signboard from the very beginning. Magistrate Dong looked up to the sky and sighed. If he had known earlier, he would have taken the initiative to gain the upper hand. He wouldn't have let this fellow have it so easily. One had to know that he had his eyes on this signboard a long time ago. As for asking Li Yi to specially inscribe his inscription with his status, he couldn't bring himself to do it. It's rare to come across such a good dish to go with wine today. Brother Wenyun, take your time and drink your tea. I'll make a move first. The man in embroidered robes laughed heartily and strode out. Stealing in broad daylight. Yin, do you still have any shame? Magistrate Dong shouted from inside the room. Haha, how can the affairs of a scholar be described as stealing? The man in embroidered robes laughed wildly. The guard carrying the signboard followed closely behind the man in embroidered robes. Under Li Yi's astonished gaze, he disappeared into the crowd. He tore down the signboard just like that. He didn't even ask for the shop owner's opinion. Wasn't he being too damn direct? He even said he was a high-ranking official from the capital. Were all officials in the capital like this? Haha, that's his personality. He's obsessed with calligraphy and has torn down countless signboards in his life. Now that this signboard is in his hands, I'm afraid he won't be able to get it back. Magistrate Dong stood up and said somewhat helplessly, I will compensate you for the losses here. What else could Li Yi say? In the Jing Kingdom, from the emperor and princess to the low-ranking officials, they were all the same. They liked to take other people's things for free. You can take away the signboard, but at the very least, you should at least show some appreciation, right? Li Yi quickly got what he wanted. A man walked in and placed a piece of paper on the table. He said, This is my lord's name card. If you come to the capital, you can use this name card to find him at the Yen Manor. At first, Li Yi thought it was a banknote. After looking at it for a while, he found that there was nothing on the paper except for the word, yen. Was this the so-called name card? There wasn't even a complete name. It was extremely sloppy. Although the shop owner didn't accept money when the signboard was made, He wouldn't have exchanged it for such a useless piece of paper. He casually threw the piece of paper on the table. The signboard had been taken away by that guy. It seemed that he wouldn't be able to get it back. After a while, when the Rui workshop reopened, he would have to order another one. Professor Feng saw that Li didn't think much of Sir Yan's name card and reminded him, "Don't underestimate this name card. Sir Yan is an assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. The appointment, dismissal, examination, promotion and transfer of civil officials are all handled by the Ministry of Personnel. Making friends with Sir Yan won't be bad for your future promotion." Li didn't know the background of the man in embroidered robes, but Professor Feng couldn't be clearer about it. The Yan family was considered a large family in the Jing kingdom. Many people in the family held high positions and were deeply trusted by His Majesty. Making friends with the Yan family would certainly make his career much smoother. Although the two of them didn't see eye to eye, Professor Feng only disliked him for not making progress. This was the professional quality of being a professor of the prefectural school. There were no personal grudges. His kind reminder this time was only in the hope that he could change his bad habits and work hard to obtain scholarly honors. Serving the country as soon as possible was the right path. Li didn't expect Professor Feng to say these words to him. Seeing the sincerity in his tone, he was slightly moved. Although the two of them didn't get along, it was undeniable that Professor Feng was a true gentleman. Putting away the name card, Li bowed to him with a solemn expression and said, "I'll remember it." "You're worth teaching." Professor Feng's expression softened and he said with satisfaction when he saw the change in him. He had once again guided a young man with limitless potential from the wrong path to the right path. He felt a great sense of accomplishment. This was the most talented and capable young man he had ever seen. Professor Feng really didn't want him to live a mediocre life, so he said again, "With your talent, it's a waste of your talent to be a mere county lieutenant. I have many friends in the capital who can write a few recommendation letters for you. You can go out and visit them. Coupled with your relationship with Sir Yan, if they jointly recommend you to His Majesty, I'm afraid you'll definitely become a county magistrate. As long as you work hard and make some achievements, there's a high chance that you'll be transferred to the capital in 10 years. Within 20 years, it's not impossible for you to be in the imperial court." Professor Feng's spittle flew everywhere as he spoke. It was as if his blood was about to boil. "Cough, thank you, Professor Feng. It's just that I've yet to recover from my injuries. Let's talk about this another time," Li said awkwardly as he covered his chest and coughed a few times. "What do you mean we'll talk about it in the future? Young man, how can you be so ignorant?" Professor Feng frowned and reprimanded him again. "We are scholars and it is our duty to serve the country." Li rubbed his slightly swollen head. "This old man, here he comes again." Chapter 271. Since you are favored by the princess, you should be diligent in the future. Don't say that you don't want to be an official anymore. I really hope to see the day when you and I become officials in the same court. Magistrate Dong said a few words of encouragement and then left with Professor Feng. It was obvious that he saw Li as a junior with a bright future. Professor Feng said a few words. When he left, he still felt that although this seedling had changed, the change was not complete and there was still a lot of room for improvement. If he could become a top official in the future, he could also boast to his old friends that he was the one who made the minister or the prime minister realize their mistakes and work hard to get to where they are today. Li put away the name card. He didn't want to go to the capital to visit Lord Yan. However, according to Professor Feng, this piece of paper seemed to be worth a penny. He just didn't know how much it could be sold for, but it would definitely be worth 100 taels. After closing the door, he saw Xiao Huan coming out of the tile-roofed house with red eyes. He thought that someone bullied her. Before he had time to ask her, the little servant girl took the initiative to say that she was touched by the love between Ning Kaichen and Ye Xiaoqian. The little girl's body was not yet mature, but she was very emotional. When she heard the story for the first time, she cried. She must have cried a lot just now. She was a little depressed at first, but after Li bought her a sugar figurine, she held it in her hand and couldn't bear to eat it. She just looked at it. Li bit off the head of the sugar figurine, and the rest was easily eaten by Xiao Huan. Li wandered on the streets of the prefecture with the little servant girl. At the same time, the princess and her people, who were travel-worn, finally arrived at the capital after a few days of travel. There were already imperial guards waiting outside the city. They cleared the way, leaving a trail of dust behind them to the palace. Is this the celestial punishment that Emingzi mentioned in the letter? In the main hall, Emperor Jing put his hands behind his back and looked at a few fist-sized black clay jars on the table. He couldn't hide the doubt on his face. Yes, father. Don't look down on these small jars. Although they are small, they have the power to destroy the world. After many days of travel, Emingzu couldn't hide the exhaustion on her face. But the matter of celestial punishment was too important. After entering the palace, she didn't take any rest and put it on her father's desk as quickly as possible. Emperor Jing still had some doubt on his face. How could the power of celestial punishment be in the hands of a human? Even he, as the emperor, didn't have this qualification. Changde, who had been accompanying Emperor Jing, also had a trace of suspicion on his old face. It was incredible that such a small thing had the power to destroy the world. His Majesty had let him read the letter, and he still had a lot of doubts about the princess's description. Seeing is believing. Li Mingzhu knew that this matter sounded unbelievable. If she did not see it with her own eyes, she would not have believed it no matter what. If father doesn't believe it, you can see the power of this thing with your own eyes. Okay. Emperor Jing laughed and said, I will personally see how it can destroy the world. After saying that, he reached out to pick up the clay jar on the table. Father, you can't. Li Mingzhu moved faster than him and picked up the heaven's punishment first. She looked at Emperor Jing, who looked at her in confusion, and explained, this thing is extremely dangerous. If you are not careful, it will be triggered. Father is the emperor, so you can't take risks. She turned to look at Changde and said, let Chief Chang do it. When Changde heard this, the corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch, but he quickly said, Princess is right. Your Majesty's body is priceless. You can't take risks. Let this old servant do it for you. He looked back at Emingzu and asked, may I ask, Princess, how do I use this thing? Use a match to ignite the wire outside. Emingzu pointed to the wire outside the clay jar and said. Seeing that Chief Chang took out a match and seemed to be about to carry out this great experiment in this palace, Mingzhu's heart suddenly jumped and she shouted, wait! Your Highness, is there anything else? Changde raised his head and looked at her with a puzzled face. Emingzu glared at him and said, it's too dangerous here. Take it outside and try it. She had seen the power of celestial punishment countless times, especially under the inspiration of Li Yi. After several days and nights of improvement by Shen Liang, the power had increased by more than one level. If it was really triggered in this palace, all of them would be buried inside if they were not careful. Chief Steward Chang didn't understand how dangerous a small jar could be with so many guards around His Majesty. Her Highness was being a little too careful. Then listen to Emingzu and go outside. Emperor Jing did not care and said with a smile. His Majesty had spoken. Although he felt that it was not necessary, Changde still went out. Of course, the celestial punishment for the experiment would not be mixed with iron nails and pieces of broken iron. This thing could even penetrate the wall. If something happened to his imperial father, no one could bear the responsibility. Not to mention the iron pieces, even the broken clay jar was very dangerous when it exploded. A guard of the princess's residence lost an arm because of this. If it was not for another person who kicked him at the critical moment, he would have to pay the price of more than just an arm. Originally, when he walked out of the palace, Changde was ready to light the thing in his hand and throw it out. However, the princess insisted on finding an abandoned small courtyard to experiment. He was very puzzled that Princess Yongle, who had always been bold since she was a child, suddenly became so timid. However, he could not disobey the princess's orders. He had no choice but to choose an abandoned palace, lit the fuse with a match and threw it in. Boom! Changde, who was standing under the wall of the palace, only heard the princess shout, "Be careful," from afar. There was a loud rumbling sound behind him. He, who was disturbed by the loud sound, even forgot to dodge and was crushed under the collapsed wall of the palace. After the loud sound, there was a dead silence. The indifferent look on Emperor Jing's face disappeared and was flushed. He covered his chest and gasped for breath. "Imperial doctor, call the imperial doctor." The dozen or so guards around them were already in a mess. Some of them were kneeling on the ground and kowtowing. Some of them were standing on the ground with pale faces and weak legs. Finally, one of them recovered and ran to find the imperial physician. In the distance there were even more panicked figures. The entire imperial palace was in an uproar because of this earth-shattering sound. Crash! A pile of bricks and stones flew out from the collapsed palace wall. Changde, whose clothes were tattered and his face was covered with dust, climbed up and patted the dust on his body. His old face was full of horror. The palace wall collapsed and there was a huge scorched pit at the foot of the wall. The palace was in a mess. Was this the power of the celestial punishment? Chapter 272. Seeing the palace wall turn into rubble in front of him, Changde finally realized the true power of the heavenly punishment. His tattered clothes were instantly drenched in sweat. No one had thought that the power of the heavenly punishment would be so terrifying. The princess was not exaggerating at all. Destroying the world, this was really destroying the world. Just now he even felt the ground under his feet shake. When he thought that he wanted to experiment in the palace, cold sweat appeared on his forehead again. If he really did that just now, the palace would definitely be destroyed. Even if something happened to His Majesty, it would not be enough for him, Changde, to die 10,000 times. For a moment, Changde's heart was filled with deep gratitude towards the princess. At this time, dozens of armored guards had surrounded the place. Several eunuchs dressed in gray appeared beside Jing Emperor and looked around vigilantly. Jing Emperor panted for a while and his breathing gradually stabilized. His face was still a little flushed. He waved his hand to shake off the guards who were supporting him and drove away the imperial doctor who was panting as he ran over. He strode towards the direction of the collapsed palace wall. Looking at the gray and black ground and rubble, Jing Emperor was silent for a long time. Suddenly he laughed out loud. Haha, what a heavenly punishment, what a heavenly punishment. With this divine object, it is enough to protect the stability of our Jing kingdom for decades. A small black clay pot had such power that even the sturdy palace wall could not withstand the power of the heavenly punishment. It could be imagined that if a few dozen or even dozens of them attacked at the same time, it could really be said to be destroying the world. Under the power of the heavenly punishment, even the sturdy city wall would be easily destroyed like tofu. The Jing kingdom had been weak for a long time and there were strong enemies eyeing it. In these years, he had worked hard to manage a big country to the current situation it was in. It was not easy to find a moment of stability, but the torture of illness had become more and more serious. When he followed the late emperor, it would be the time when the stability and peace of the Jing kingdom would be disrupted. Because of this, he often could not eat or sleep in peace. However, the appearance of such a national treasure was like a ray of light in the darkness, making him seem to see infinite hope. With the Jing country's current national strength, they didn't need to expand their territory, but with this object as a deterrent, it was likely that no one would dare to have any ideas about the Jing country. This old servant congratulates His Majesty and the Jing kingdom. Changde had served Emperor Jing for decades. How could he not know what he was thinking? A smile also appeared on his wrinkled face. He knelt on one knee and said loudly, "Wah." The surrounding guards immediately knelt down as well. Although they didn't know what was going on, they still knew what was going on. Their orderly and loud voices spread far and wide, resounding throughout the entire palace. Congratulations to His Majesty and the Jing kingdom. Congratulations to His Majesty and the Jing kingdom. Congratulations to His Majesty and the Jing kingdom. In the letter, Emingzu said that this item can be used as a weapon to break a city. At the same time, it is also a treasure to kill enemies on the battlefield. The broken pieces of the jar are embedded in the wall. If it is used on the battlefield, it will immediately become a hell on earth. In the palace, Emperor Jing looked at the few jars on the table and nodded with satisfaction. Father, these are only used for testing. The real, sky punishment, will be mixed with iron nails and pieces to increase its power. Once it explodes, there will be no survivors within 3 feet. Emingzu pointed at the jar on the table and said. Changde heard this and took a deep breath. Even the broken jars could be embedded in the wall. What kind of power was that? If it was an iron weapon, if the sky punishment that he ignited was like what the princess said, he would have been turned into a sieve by now. An individual's martial strength was not worth mentioning in front of the power of heaven. After being stunned for a moment, Emperor Jing's smile became wider. He said the word good a few times in a row. Suddenly, a trace of sharpness appeared in his eyes. Qi Kingdom, the new year is coming. I plan to give you a big gift. I hope you will like it. He seemed to have seen the scene of the Qi Kingdom soldiers fleeing in panic in front of the sky punishment. He felt the depression that had accumulated in his heart for a long time was swept away. He turned to look at Emingzu and asked, "How much does it cost?" Emingzu said respectfully, "Father, it is easy to make. The materials used are cheap and the cost is very low." The sky punishment was powerful. Even if it was expensive to make, Emperor Jing would not give it up. Now that he heard that it was cheap, he was overjoyed. After thinking for a while, he looked at her and asked, "Who made it? Where is he now?" A trace of hesitation flashed on Mingzhu's face, but it quickly disappeared. She said, The one who made the sky punishment was a performer called Shen Liang in Qingyan Prefecture. His ancestors were all cigarette makers. He accidentally discovered the formula of the sky punishment. After I learned about it, I immediately controlled him and brought him to the capital. The people of the princess's mansion also participated in the production of the sky punishment. However, only Shen Liang and I know the core formula. Emperor Jing let out a long sigh of relief. The last trace of worry in his heart was gone. In the future, Shen Liang will be responsible for supervising the production of the sky punishment. He is not allowed to contact outsiders. I will send people to mark out a place outside the city for the research and development of the sky punishment. In addition, I will send 50 craftsmen and 1,000 imperial guards to the war zone. I want to see whether the soldiers of the Qi kingdom are more powerful, or the power of the Jing kingdom. Emperor Jing issued several orders in a row. When he looked back and saw the tired expression on his daughter's face, he said softly, "It has been hard on you. Go back and rest. I will leave the rest to you." "Father, this is the formula of the sky punishment." Emingzu nodded. She was indeed tired after the long journey. After offering the formula of the gunpowder, she slowly left the palace. Emperor Jing took the formula and looked at it for a long time. He picked up a clay pot and carefully examined it in his hand. Changde personally felt the power and terror of this thing. He wanted to stay far away from this palace. When he saw the emperor pick up the sky punishment, he hurriedly said, "Your Majesty?" Emperor Jing waved his hand and interrupted him. He also put the clay pot back to its original position. "You are indeed the person I like. Li, I am really curious. How many blessings can you bring to the Jing kingdom?" Emperor Jing said slowly. If Emingzu was here, she would definitely be shocked by his words at this moment. Changde thought for a while and said, "Your Majesty, the matter of the sky punishment is unusual. Do you want to?" Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "No need. Emingzu will not choose the wrong person. I will not choose the wrong person either. Since there is a Shen Liang, there will definitely be a second and a third one. Pass down the order. Strictly prohibit the sale of saltpeter and sulfur. Let the government buy them all." After the order was issued, someone behind him immediately responded and walked out of the palace. "Emingzu has never lied to me before. This is the first time. You are more capable than I thought." Thinking of the young man who talked to him in the garden of the prince's residence, a strange smile appeared on Emperor Jing's face. "How should I reward you for offering such an important weapon of the country? Forget it. It's almost the end of the year. I will let you be free for a few more days." After Emperor Jing muttered a few words to himself, he issued a few more orders. Chapter 273. According to the customs of the royal family, after a princess came of age, she could no longer stay in the palace. Although she didn't have to go to a fief, she still had to build her own residence outside the palace. Princesses who lived in the palace were either underage or very favored. Princesses like Princess Yongla, who had passed the age of 15 but still had their own residence in the palace and didn't have to leave the palace, were few and far between. Many imperial censors submitted memorials about this, but they were all suppressed by the emperor. This showed how much he liked Princess Yongla. Of course, Princess Yongla was the daughter of the empress, the only daughter of the emperor and the empress. It was very normal for her to have such preferential treatment. Emingzu walked out of the hall, and the old woman waiting outside followed behind her. They walked towards a palace in the rear palace. Emingzu said as they walked, "Imperial father wants to send 50 craftsmen to the battlefield. Let Xinliang go with them. Half of the people in the princess residence who participated in making Tianfa will go with them as well. Tianfa is too dangerous, they have to be careful at all times." Without experiencing it for themselves, they didn't know how dangerous Tianfa was. Even if they knew the recipe, it would be a disaster if they weren't careful. The people of the princess residence had memorized all the rules and regulations that Li Yi had laid out for her. With them following her, it would be much safer. "Don't worry, princess. I will arrange it immediately when I return," the old woman responded. Then a trace of hesitation appeared on her face. She whispered a few more words in her ear. "What? Imperial father already knows?" She stopped and her expression changed. The old woman nodded and said, "His Majesty's personal palace maids all know about this. It's not a secret. Let him see me immediately." Mingzhu's expression darkened. "Nanny, why is the princess looking for me?" In the princess residence, a young man followed the old woman and asked in confusion. Naturally, this old woman doesn't know about the princess. The old woman said faintly and pointed to the back garden of the princess' residence. The princess is there. Go there yourself. The man saw a figure in the garden and suppressed the uneasiness in his heart. He strode over. Princess, he said respectfully and stood at the back waiting quietly. Emingzu turned her head and a trace of disappointment appeared on her face as she said, Guard Lu, you've been working in the princess residence for quite some time, right? Princess, I am indebted to the princess for her promotion. I have been in the princess residence for 5 years. The young man said slowly. From tomorrow onwards, you will be Shun Liang's personal bodyguard. Tian Fei's matter is of great importance. You must ensure that the secret formula will not be leaked, and you must not let anything happen to Shun Liang. Emingzu looked at a plum blossom that had yet to bloom in the garden as she spoke plainly. As if he had thought of something, the young man's face suddenly turned pale. His knees went soft and he knelt down. He kowtowed as if he was pounding garlic and shouted, Thank you, Your Highness. From now on, as long as the secret recipe exists, this subordinate will exist. The secret recipe is faulty, this subordinate will atone for it with his life. 1,000 imperial guards left the imperial palace in the middle of the night. The sound of the horses' hooves on the stone floor seemed to shake the entire capital. No one knew what had happened. The people in the city all closed their doors and windows and hid in their homes. After the dust settled, pairs of eyes peeked out from the cracks in the doors, guessing what had happened. The palace had not made such a big move in a long time. As for the officials in the capital and the rich and noble families, many of them did not sleep the whole night. Their backs were drenched in cold sweat. For so many imperial guards to be mobilized, something big must have happened. They just didn't know who would be the unlucky one this time. They just hoped it wouldn't be them. When the sky brightened and nothing special happened, everyone could finally relax. For a moment, the rich and noble families all sent out carriages and horses. Officials of all levels walked around each other to gather information. Compared to this matter, the matter of the princess residence changing the guard leader was not worth mentioning. At the same time, in the faraway Qing and prefectural city, it was far from the somber atmosphere of the capital. As the new year approached, the prefectural city became livelier day by day. After a busy year, it was finally the day when everything could rest. Other than the peddlers and a few people with special professions, most people would choose to give themselves a holiday and enjoy life. The large and small brothels inside and outside the city were packed from morning to night. In particular, the theaters in the prefectural city, as well as the large brothels that had been built outside the city, became the favorite place of entertainment for most people. There were all kinds of performances, puppet shows, movie shows, and all kinds of programs. It was enough to dazzle the eyes. If one was tired of these, they could go to the large brothels to watch the stage plays. They were all new plays and were brilliant. It was definitely worth spending a few copper coins for them. In order to maintain the security in the city, the government sent out more bailiffs. From time to time, the soldiers of the city defense could be seen walking on the street. Sometimes, bailiffs were mixed in the crowd. The roadside vendors greeted them warmly and gave them hot buns and cakes. The bailiffs did not refuse. They took a bite with a smile and continued to patrol. Although he felt that he could beat a cow to death with his current physical condition, Li was still in a state of recuperation. Anyway, before Her Highness left, she had asked for a long sick leave for him. The task of maintaining the security was handed over to County Magistrate Lu. After all, capable people should do more work. As for ordinary small cases, with Lui's help, there wouldn't be any problems. This kid was born to do this. No one knew how he had been muddle-headed in the past, but this time he suddenly became enlightened. He had solved several old cases, and his reputation had spread across several counties. It was said that no criminal could hold on for the time it took for 2 incense sticks to burn under his hands. This was how a qualified subordinate should be. Li was extremely proud of his discerning eyes. When he woke up, he washed his face with cold water. After shivering for a while, he suddenly felt refreshed. Today was the Lunar New Year. According to the customs here, people should start to buy New Year's goods and offer sacrifices to the kitchen god. The customs of the Lunar New Year in later generations were different in different places. Li did not know how to celebrate the Lunar New Year here. It was enough for Xiao Huan and Rui to know. After what happened last time, they no longer lit the stove at home at night. But they still lit the fire every morning. For the first time, Li felt that carbon monoxide was also a good thing. It could actually promote the relationship between husband and wife. He was not Lu Xiaohui. He could not resist sleeping with such a beautiful wife every night. Although he had not broken through the last line of defense, he had taken a lot of advantages. It was just that he felt a little uncomfortable when he got up in the morning. When Rui brought him toiletries, her face was always red. Chapter 274. After the Little New Year, there were only 6 or 7 days left before the Spring Festival. The Little New Year's Day was considered a relatively important festival. Early in the morning, Xiao Huan took a rag and carefully wiped every room. Even Mississippi Lu was sweeping the courtyard with a broom, which was a rare occurrence. Although the courtyard was originally so clean that there was not even a single fallen leaf. Just now, Zhuzi ran over and gave a thick stack of window flowers. They were of different shapes and were extremely beautiful. Xiao Huan said that Aunt Fang's skill in cutting window flowers was unique in the village. She would send some to her house every year. After saying that, she took the window flowers and went into the house to find paste. When Li Yi walked out of the courtyard, he saw that every household was busy. Even the naughty children were not idle. Each of them took a small broom and swept in front of the door. As they swept, it became a broom war. Dust flew everywhere and screams could be heard. After a while, an adult ran out of the courtyard and dragged the naughty children back home by their ears. It did not matter if it was a festival or not to beat children. After a while, the naughty children's screams came from inside. When he walked out of the gate of the house, the atmosphere of the new year was everywhere. Counting the days, he had been here for a full half a year. Before he had time to reminisce, a clear voice came from behind him. "Excuse me, does Lu Rui live here?" Li Yi turned around and saw a young girl about the same age as Rui standing behind him. She was carrying a small bag on her back and holding a long sword in her hand. She was standing there and looking at him. "Young master, what's wrong?" A man strode out from inside and stood beside Li Yi. "Why are you looking for Rui?" Li Yi looked at her and asked. Looking at the young girl's attire, she looked like a person from Jianghu. It seemed that she did not have good intentions. "She is indeed here." A hint of understanding appeared on the young girl's face. She said lightly and strode into the house. "Stop." This young girl was obviously looking for trouble. How could old Su, who was standing beside Li Yi, let her enter so easily? He reached out to grab her shoulder. "Humph, your martial arts are too weak. I won't fight with you." The girl lightly struck out with her palm and landed it on old Su's shoulder. Old Su involuntarily took a few steps back and leaned against the door to stabilize himself. Just as he was about to fight again, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "There's no rush. Let's see what she wants first." She didn't look like she was here for revenge. Ever since all the bandits from the Greenwood Forest were killed, they hadn't met anyone else who was blind. Li Yi was not worried at all. Rui had always been modest about her martial arts skills. Last time he indirectly asked Mississippi Lu about it, and the answer he got was that the number of people in the entire Jing kingdom who could defeat his sister could be counted on one hand. Li Yi looked left and right, looking up and down, but he didn't feel that this hand included the girl. "You're going the wrong way. See, the person you're looking for is in the yard over there." Seeing the girl wander around the house like a headless fly, Li Yi kindly pointed her in the right direction. "Young master, this girl is." Fang walked out of his yard and looked at the strange girl, asking in confusion. Li Yi shook his head, indicating that he didn't know either. The girl entered the yard with a small bag on her back. When she looked up, she saw a woman about her age or maybe just a little older, standing in the yard, sweeping with a broom in her hand. The first time she saw the woman, she knew she was a master. "You're Lu Rui, the number 1 on the Wulin hero list and the heaven list?" The girl untied the small bag on her back and threw it aside. With a flash of cold light, she pulled out the long sword in her hand and held it in front of her chest. She bowed to the woman in front of her and said, "I want to challenge you. If I win, you have to give up your number 1 position on the heaven list to me." "Wulin hero list? What's that?" Fang was dumbfounded. He only understood that the girl wanted to challenge the second young mistress. As for the rest, he didn't understand a single word. Fang and the others didn't understand, but Li Yi did. The Wulin hero list was something that Oldman's son had created not long ago under his instructions. After a comprehensive analysis of the strength and reputation of the masters in Wulin, the ranking would be made. The higher the ranking, the stronger the master. This list was mainly divided into the heaven list, the earth list, and the mortal list. The heaven list was the strongest, followed by the earth list, and then the mortal list. Above these 3 lists there was a guru list. However, there were only a few people on the guru list. Every one of them was a famous guru master in Wulin. With a stomp of their feet, the whole Wulin would shake. The heaven list, the earth list, and the mortal list had 100 people on each list. Of course, time was limited, so Oldman's son and a few old friends had only sorted out 50 people on the heaven list. In order to ensure the authority of the list, Wu Er found a few friends in the martial arts world to participate in the ranking of the list. Some storytellers in the brothels outside the city made the deeds of the heroes on the list into stories, 1 to 10, 10 to 100. Soon, even an 8-year-old child was familiar with the affairs of the martial arts world. Originally, the people of the martial arts world did not care much about these things. However, the person who made the list seemed to be very familiar with the martial arts world. The heaven list almost covered all the famous top experts in the martial arts world. There was also a very detailed explanation of their ranking order. It was able to convince people. Gradually, it actually gained the recognition of most people. At this time, many people couldn't sit still. Needless to say, those on the guru list were all seniors who had dominated Wulin for decades. They didn't dare to compare with them. The few people at the top of the heaven list had outstanding achievements, so they didn't have any objections to being ranked in front of them. For example, the number 1 woman on the heaven list, surnamed Lu, in the past 2 years, the number of masters who had fallen in her hands could not be counted. Dozens of Lulin masters went to find trouble with her, but none of them returned. They were sincerely convinced that she was ranked first. However, those who were on the list were naturally secretly delighted. People lived in this world for nothing more than fame and profit. No matter how high one's martial arts was, it was useless if others didn't know about it. Everyone hoped that their strength would be recognized by others. For scholars, there was a Zhuang Yuan, Bang Yan, and Tan Hua in the imperial examinations. For martial artists, there was a Wulin hero list. It was a very normal thing. However, although there was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts, which martial artist would be willing to admit that they were second? Li Si, who was ranked 50th on the heaven list after a little joy, was quickly dissatisfied. That bastard Zhang San was actually ranked 49th on the heaven list. Why was he ranked ahead of him? That bastard was obviously no match for him. If he could defeat him, wouldn't his ranking increase? Little did he know that Zhang San, who was ranked 49th, was also feeling uncomfortable. Years ago he had fought with Wang Er, who was ranked 48th on the heaven list. Although he lost, he had improved rapidly in the past few years. If he met him again, the outcome was uncertain. Why was he ranked ahead of him? Also, who was that Zhao Yuanwei who was ranked 40th? Was there such a person in the martial arts world? Of course, those who were not on the list were not very satisfied either. They thought that their strength was greater than those on the list. Why were they not on the list? Of course, no one would think of finding those storytellers to add themselves to the list. That would be laughed at by their peers in the martial arts world. Moreover, they did not know where the list came from. They could not find the person at all. Moreover, he was so familiar with the martial arts world. It meant that he must be someone in the martial arts world. There was no doubt about this. Since he had already acknowledged this list, of course he had to rely on his own strength to get on it. The others on the list could not be underestimated. However, the guy ranked 40th was unheard of. He was the best way to make a name for himself. In short, the martial arts world, which had never been peaceful, was once again stirred up because of this list. Although it could not be described as a reign of terror, the popularity of martial arts competitions was at its peak in the past few decades. Seeing the girl holding a sword in her hand and looking at Rui with an eager expression on her face, Li rubbed the area between his eyebrows, feeling a slight headache. It seemed that he had inadvertently brought quite a bit of trouble to Rui. Chapter 275. Lu Rui raised her head and glanced at the girl. She continued to sweep the yard. She had heard about the Wulin hero ranking and was unhappy that her name was not on it. If her sister had not stopped her, she would have gone to look for trouble with the second master on the heaven list. She had completely mastered the essence of Tai Chi sword. After her swordsmanship improved, she faced a new bottleneck. This time it would not be easy to break through. A goal that was too far away would always make people lose motivation. She did not practice much these days. According to Li Yi's story, sweeping was also a form of cultivation, so she decided to try her best. However, although her swordsmanship did not improve, she was much calmer. When she was free, she would sweep the yard with a broom. The yard was cleaner than ever. "Excuse me," she said without looking up when she swept the girl's feet. "According to the rules of Jianghu, if you don't accept my challenge, the first place on the heaven list will be mine." The girl was not angry when she was ignored. She did not realize that she had recognized the wrong person. She only knew that the girl in front of her was not simple. The first place on the heaven list was a girl. Did that mean that she was the most powerful girl in the Jing kingdom, apart from the grandmasters? Fang crossed his arms and looked like he was watching a show. This girl was really brave to challenge the elder Mississippi. He did not expect that she would mistake the second miss for the elder Mississippi. He did not know if she was lucky or unlucky. In terms of martial arts, the elder miss was definitely more powerful. However, the elder miss was kind and knew when to stop. As for the second miss, she never showed mercy when she fought. I didn't expect the first place on the heaven list to have such little courage. The girl pouted and turned to leave. I will tell them that Lu Rui is just SOSO. She does not even have the courage to accept the challenge. How can she be the first? As soon as the words left her mouth, her expression suddenly changed. She whipped her head around, only to find a fair hand resting on her slender neck. Even if she was a martial arts master, the neck was her weakest part. If the hand exerted a little force, her neck would be broken. This is a sneak attack. She glared at him and said, unconvinced. Lu Rui held the broom in one hand and let go of her neck with the other. He made a pleased gesture. She could ignore this young girl's challenge, but she would not allow her to tarnish her sister's reputation. The girl stood in front of her with a sword in her hand and asked, "You don't need a weapon?" Lu Rui was too lazy to respond. Her opponent was this little girl, and she did not even have the interest to draw her sword. Be careful. To a true expert, having or not having a weapon didn't make much of a difference. When she turned around to leave just now, she actually had her guard up, but she still managed to grab his neck. This was enough for him to be careful. When he opened his mouth, the long sword was like a spirit snake, swallowing and spitting out cold light as it pierced forward. Her vision blurred, and the figure of the woman in front of her disappeared. Then she felt a tightness on her neck, and that white palm appeared on her neck again. You fought. You can go. Lu Rui released his hand from her neck and continued to sweep the dust on the ground with the broom. Li looked at her with envy. She was calm, carefree and calm. This was the attitude that a master should have. She had hit the opponent's confidence several times. Even if she lost, she had to make her lose wholeheartedly. In the end, she said calmly, "With your talent, go back and practice hard for 30 years, then come back to me." The temperament of a grandmaster was undoubtedly revealed. Of course, there was a small risk in doing this. If the challenger had the halo of a protagonist, after being humiliated, he would suddenly comprehend a peerless martial art. 3 years later, he would come back again and kill the grandmaster with his sword. At the same time, he would put on an annual drama of a grassroots counterattack. Li did not see the counterattack. The development of the story was a little different from what he had expected. The young girl stood still for a moment, and suddenly knelt on one knee. She held the sword with both hands and said loudly, "I can't beat you. Please accept me as your disciple." The young girl's turn was very quick. Fang's mouth opened wide and his jaw almost dropped. Li looked at her in surprise. He suddenly felt that the challenge was just a cover. Her ultimate goal was to become his disciple. A hint of surprise flashed in Lu Rui's beautiful eyes, but it was soon hidden. She shook her head and said, "You've got the wrong person. I'm not the person you're looking for, and I won't accept you as my disciple. You're much more powerful than me. Only by becoming your disciple can I learn more powerful martial arts. I won't give up." The young girl raised her head and said firmly. The purpose of her trip was to become a disciple. Although she didn't know how good the legendary Lu Rui's martial arts were, the woman in front of her, who was not much older than her, was the most powerful person she had ever seen in her life. Thus, she immediately made up her mind. She picked up the small bag on the ground and carried it on her back. Then she picked up another broom from the corner and swept behind Lu Rui. "Young master, do you want to kick her out?" Fang asked tentatively. "No need. Let her sweep if she wants to," Lu Rui said indifferently before Li could answer. She put down the broom and went into the house. Xiao Huan held Rui's hand and walked out of the house. She asked Li, "Young master, when are we going out to buy?" Who's this sister?" "Hee, let's do it. 40 on the hero ranking and heaven ranking. Congratulations, Brother Zhao. I didn't expect Brother Zhao to be so secretive. Brother Zhao was too humble in the past. We were all fooled by you. After we drink our fill, we must learn from Brother Zhao." Chuzhou Xiangqing. In Squire Zhao's house, more than 10 Jianghu people drank to their heart's content. They all toasted a man with a goatee sitting at the head of the table. "I don't know who made this up. How can I get a place on the hero ranking?" Squire Zhao said with a dry laugh. He knew his own strength very well. He had some life-saving methods that others didn't know about, but he was definitely not that powerful. Brother Zhao, you are wrong. The hero ranking has been recognized by the people of the Jianghu. Everyone is proud to be on the hero ranking. Brother Zhao, you don't have to be humble anymore, someone said with a wave of his hand. Squire Zhao didn't explain this time. This matter was indeed very useful for increasing his reputation. It could probably attract more Jianghu people to join him. It was not a bad thing. Haha, let's drink. He laughed and temporarily changed the topic. Bang. While everyone was drinking happily, there was suddenly a muffled sound from the side. The door of the Zhao mansion collapsed and dust flew up. A burly figure walked in from outside. Who are you? After being stunned for a moment, someone immediately put down his wine bowl and walked over angrily. How dare he destroy the door of the Zhao mansion in front of so many people? Was he looking down on them? He walked to the side of the burly man and was about to stop him, but he was punched by the burly man. He fell to the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with fear. Seeing this, the people around the table all stood up with murderous gazes. I am Pound of Qingzhou, ranked 41st on the heaven roll. Which one of you is Squire Zhao? I want to see who is ranked ahead of me. The burly man laughed wildly. His voice was as loud as a giant bell. So you are a master on the heaven roll. Sorry for not recognizing you. A man from Qingzhou dares to challenge Chuzhou? Do you think there is no one in Chuzhou? You are only ranked 41st on the heaven roll. How can you be compared to our brother Zhao? Yes, brother Zhao, show him your power. Hearing that this person was only ranked 41st on the heaven roll, behind Squire Zhao, everyone's faces relaxed and they urged him. No one noticed that Zhao Yuanwei, who was hiding at the back of the crowd, was pale as a sheet. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.